want to understand the risk. So where there's an unknown, they're going to charge more premium.
Contessa Brewer reporting there. A remarkable reign. The entire world remembering Queen Elizabeth II. After the break, we are live in London with a look back at key moments in her life and how her legacy helped shape the future.
It's the best time of the morning. Time for that pop stuff, baby.
I'm feeling the vibe today on the show.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition. Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
It's the best time of the morning. Time for that pop stuff, baby.
I'm feeling the vibe today on the show.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Bottom of the hour now. Here's what we're watching. New York has declared a state of emergency to boost polio vaccinations. The virus has been detected in water samples in 4 metro areas of New York. The emergency declaration will put vaccine in the hands of pharmacists, midwives, and EMS workers. The state hopes to boost vaccination to 90%. A Georgia family has been awarded $77 million in a wrongful death lawsuit. Nick Carasillo's family says he was abruptly discharged from an addiction treatment center in Atlanta in 2017. He was hit by several cars on a highway just a few days after he was discharged. His father still wants to see changes in staffing and guidelines at treatment facilities. And the stepmother of a missing New Hampshire girl is now considered a fugitive after she skipped out on a court hearing on Thursday. Kayla Montgomery facing allegations that she received welfare payments on the girl's behalf while she was not actually under her care. The child, Harmony Montgomery, has been missing since 2019. She would now be 9 years old. King Charles III, has now addressed the world as the British monarch for the first time. Lines of people gathered outside Buckingham Palace. The King and Queen Consort Camilla returned less than 24 hours after the death of Queen Elizabeth. Britain has now entered a national period of mourning, which will last 10 days. We continue our coverage this hour with NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter live in London first here. Molly, how is the Queen's legacy being remembered as Britain enters this period of mourning now?
This period of mourning and a little bit of period of uncertainty, too. She was unbelievably unifying. Everyone we spoke with today, Erin, spoke about her unity, her constant presence in their lives, young and old. But we put together a couple of her really top moments. Take a look.
Queen Elizabeth II taking on the challenge of her life at just 25 years old when she was crowned after the death of her father, King George, in 1953. Elizabeth was not originally raised to be queen, but she always had a close relationship with the British people, speaking to them during the London Blitz as princess.
For God will care for us and give us victory and peace.
After taking the throne for 70 years, she balanced the public duties of her office, becoming the most widely traveled monarch in history with the private roles of mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, speaking directly to her subjects in a Christmas address every year.
But now, at least for a few minutes, I welcome you to the peace of my own home.
During her reign, 15 British prime ministers served in office, and she met 14 U.S. presidents. Through turbulent periods of war and economic crisis, she stayed out of the political fray, but she embraced her role as head of state, meeting weekly with prime ministers, seeking to project stability on her visits to Commonwealth states after the decline of the British Empire, and gestures of peace, becoming the first British monarch in 100 years to visit the Republic of Ireland after years of violence. More recently, she navigated the turbulent waters of the Brexit vote to leave the European Union and later the COVID-19 pandemic. But her public leadership was at times overshadowed by the royal family's own personal upheavals. The tragic death of Princess Diana in 1997 rocked the family and the world, many criticizing the Queen for waiting days to publicly address Diana's death.
I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death.
In later years, some more family strife, her son Prince Andrew facing accusations of sexual misconduct, which he denies, and disputes between Prince Harry and the family, though she stayed close to all of her grandchildren. And perhaps the hardest loss to bear came just last year with the death of her husband of over 7 decades. The black-clad queen seen grieving Prince Philip alone. But this year, the family honored her, gathering to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years on the throne, 3 future kings flanking the monarch. The Queen carried on until the very end, meeting with incoming Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss just 2 days before her death.
Molly, we've noted the official mourning period will last until the Queen's funeral. What can you tell us about the plans for that, the funeral plan, where she'll be buried?
Yeah, Aaron, and these plans have been choreographed over many, many years of planning, minute by minute. So what we can tell you, and many of the details are just for planning, are classified at this point, but what we can tell you is her body is still currently in Scotland. In the next few days, it will come down to London. She will lie in state behind me at the Houses of Parliament. There will be processions in the street. There will be moments for millions and millions of people, and I'm not exaggerating by the numbers, to come here and pay their respects before she is laid to rest at Windsor Castle. Really the residence that she spent most of her time, especially after the last couple of years, but she will be laid to rest next to her husband, as we mentioned in that piece, Prince Philip, who died just last year.
Molly Hunter for us in London today. Molly, thank you. I want to bring in Aaron Hill now, the senior news editor of People magazine. The commemorative issue of People, honoring the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth, is out now. You can see some of the cover images here. Aaron, we heard from King Charles a little while ago. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say today, and we'll talk on the other side. All right. It would appear that we may not have. We do have it. Let's play it.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to all today.
Connecting his own story, his future, to his mother's life of service there. What has public support been like for now this new king, Aaron?
Yeah, this speech was really well received. It really married both, him grieving the loss of his mother as a son, and also paying tribute to her legacy as his monarch, and then really setting the tone for his role as King Charles now. And he really struck a wonderful balance of setting the tone. He's already off to business, mentioning titles, the kind of king he's going to be, his devotion to the service, just like his mother, the things things that he wants to evoke from his mother and his role, and then also touching that personal element that everyone wants to hear right now, what it's been like for him as a son and for the family, and having him mention Harry and Meghan in particular, and sending them his love and wishing them well as they continue their new life in the U.S. So it's been, he's been met with a lot of warmth outside of Buckingham Palace, where supporters of the Queen have come to pay tribute, and just he really set a nice tone with this speech for sure.
You know, he's not a stranger to people there in Great Britain. They know him and the things that he cares about and how he sort of moves in the world. Can we expect any big differences in the monarchy now that Charles is king?
The big difference that's going to come from Charles is this idea of a slimmed down monarchy. And, you know, in the years past, we've seen, if you think back to Trooping the Colour, big balcony moments, a packed balcony, all extended members of the royal family, dozens and dozens of them. And we saw a glimpse into what Charles' monarchy will look like in June during the Platinum Jubilee, a very stripped down, slimmed down family on the balcony. We just saw the Queen alongside Charles and Camilla, William, Kate, and their 3 children. And that's the future of the monarchy right there. Very different view from what we've seen in years past.
All right, Erin Hill with us today. Erin, we appreciate your time today. Thank you. Now, perhaps the only thing longer than the Queen's reign was her love story with Prince Philip. NBC's Kelly Kobiea takes a look back at their romance.
The Queen and Prince Philip had a love story for the ages, and the world had a front seat to their fairy tale romance from the very beginning. A romance that aged like fine wine. Side by side, the Queen and her prince went through a lifetime of celebrations and tribulations for more than 7 decades.
Quite simply, been my strength and stay all these years.
It was love at first sight. The Queen, only a princess in 1939, spotted the dapper and towering 18-year-old Philip while on vacation and immediately became enraptured.
And she fell desperately head over heels in love with him.
Like any great romance, their bond was put to the test when Philip joined the Royal Navy during World War II. But their courtship continued long distance.
It was a correspondence love affair, really. They wrote letters to one another.
And with each letter, their feelings flourished until Philip returned from war and asked the future Queen's hand in marriage. It was the wedding of the century, broadcast around the world in 1947.
Londoners slept in the streets to see their future queen and her husband.
But their quiet home life in Malta didn't last long. In 1952, the sudden passing of King George VI would thrust the princess into the spotlight. At 25 years old, she became a queen, from princess to monarch, and from wife to matriarch. At the coronation, Prince Philip bent the knee to swear his allegiance to her.
He was always quite the alpha male, so having to take a step back and follow his wife as she became head of state was a big adjustment for him.
He gave up his work and stood by her side, making a life together sprinkled with humor.
Tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
They were married for 73 years until Philip's death in April of 2021 during the height of the COVID pandemic. The Queen having to mourn alone in the church as she said farewell to her life partner, leaving a handwritten note on his casket.
But for me, in the months since the death of my beloved Philip, I have drawn great comfort from the warmth and affection of the many tributes to his life and work. That mischievous, inquiring twinkle was as bright at the end as when I first set eyes on him.
The Queen will be laid to rest alongside Prince Philip in the family chapel in that grand St. George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle, where the couple spent their last months together.
Now, with the Queen's death, the line of succession has shifted for the British monarchy. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk shows us what's changed.
Hey there. So life will obviously change most dramatically for King Charles, but his eldest son, Prince William, is now first in line to the throne. And with that position comes new titles for him and Kate Middleton, and new responsibilities, too. On Wednesday, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge brought their children to the first day of school, George, Charlotte, and Louis. By Thursday afternoon, the couple would have new titles and new roles, their royal lives very different. William and Kate are now the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge, and Prince William is the heir to the throne. He takes over as the Duke of Cornwall from his father, a role traditionally held by the eldest son of the reigning British monarch. It comes with an estate that includes more than 130,000 acres of land, worth over $1 billion. As Duke, Charles used the money it generated at least in part to fund his charities. In a 2019 ITV documentary, Prince Charles Inside the Duchy of Cornwall, Prince William recognizing the significance of his future role.
Rest assured, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'll do much the same as what my father's doing.
King Charles may also give William the title Prince of Wales, making Kate the Princess of Wales, the same title held by William's mother, the late Princess Diana.
You're going to be a brilliant princess.
Earlier this year, the couple moved to a new royal residence, Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, outside of London. At the time, the palace noting they would be taking on far more senior roles in the royal family, something that had already begun as the Queen stepped back from royal engagements. For the Platinum Jubilee, William and Kate made a controversial trip to Commonwealth nations in the Caribbean, many of those countries considering severing ties with the monarchy altogether over its colonial past. William addressed the issue in a closely watched speech, navigating one of the thorniest issues facing the monarchy.
We support with pride and respect your decisions about your future. Relationships evolve, friendship endures.
During the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebration in London, this moment on the balcony now even more poignant, the succession to her throne at her sides, a public showing that the future of the monarchy was now in her son and her grandson's hands. The succession to King Charles now, Prince William is first, then his 3 children. Prince Harry is 5th in line. And as we have noted, King Charles is 73 years old. His reign will obviously be much shorter than his mother's, making William's public responsibilities greater and more scrutinized than ever before. Back to you.
Coming up, the move that put the future of abortion access on the ballot in a key battleground state. Stay with us.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
News is happening now.
To look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast, available anytime and anywhere.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive.
A federal judge in Texas has ruled employers are not required to cover the cost of a popular medication for HIV. The judge decided it violates the religious beliefs of the Christian-owned company. The lawsuit dates back to 2020. It challenged the Affordable Care Act's requirement of free coverage of the drug known as PrEP. HIV prevention groups call the decision, quote, terrible. It will now be up to Michigan voters whether to protect abortion rights in that state. A constitutional amendment will appear on the ballot in November. NBC News Digital investigative reporter Chloe Atkins joins me now to explain this. So, Chloe, walk us through the state Supreme Court ruling here and what this means come Election Day.
The Michigan Supreme Court ruled 5-2 yesterday, allowing a ballot initiative that would enshrine abortion rights into the state's constitution to be on the ballot in November. Now, this fight over the ballot initiative went before the High Court after the state's Board of Elections couldn't come to an agreement over whether or not they wanted this initiative to go before voters this fall. But now, after this ruling in November, voters will weigh in directly on the future of abortion rights in the state of Michigan. And if any recent elections are any indication, this ballot initiative could really boost voter turnout and could be very beneficial to Democrats who are looking to hold on to 3 statewide seats come this fall.
Chloe, we saw some of this coming, right? Democrats have been looking to get abortion rights on the ballot in several states this fall. How does Michigan sort of set the stage for that push beyond Michigan?
Democrats in multiple states around the country are putting forward ballot initiatives very similar to Michigan's by the time voters head to the polls this fall in places like California and even Vermont. But, Aaron, I do want to add that Republicans in conservative-leaning states are also working to put forward ballot initiatives that restrict or eliminate abortion rights altogether in places like Montana and even in my home state of Kentucky, where voters could consider a ballot initiative that would not protect the right to an abortion or the funding of an abortion. And Aaron, of course, this is all in reaction to the overturning of Roe v. Wade in June.
All right, Chloe Atkins for us in the newsroom today. Chloe, thank you. There is much more news ahead. You're watching NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
NBC News, streaming free now.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
The indictment of a former president, perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
NBC News, streaming free now.
You know, tracing our ancestry can help us understand where we come from. But in the Black community, that journey sometimes leads to dead ends. Our Maya Eaglin went to Louisiana to do some research on her own family after a pretty surprising discovery.
In 2021, I was working on a story about students pushing for reparations at Georgetown University.
272 people out of about 1,000 total who had been owned by Georgetown University and the Maryland Jesuits. And those 272 were people who were sold all at once and all together to 3 sugar plantations in southern Louisiana to rescue Georgetown from bankruptcy.
During my reporting, I found Harriet Eaglin, a 6-year-old who was part of that group in 1838. But that story led to even more questions. Could I confirm Harriet was related to me? And how did my family go from being in bondage to current landowners in Louisiana? Our family's farm is in St. Landry Parish, so I started my search in the courthouse archives.
What can you share about the racial makeup of St. Landry Parish historically?
Spanish influence, French influence, Indians, blacks, Creoles, and free people of color. It was quite a mixture. You had white merchants, you had black merchants, you had white plantation owners, you had black plantation owners.
Charles Jagno is the elected county clerk. He's in the beginning stages of opening a genealogical tourism division at the courthouse. The parish archivist, Alex Lee, also did a little research on my family to help find some answers.
All of your direct ancestors were some of the earliest free black landowners in the area.
And we recently met, but you told me there's something special about our connection.
We're actually relatives.
That is unbelievable.
Right.
How are we relatives? How are we related?
We actually related in a multiple ways, so that's why I kind of laughed when I started to go through your request. As soon as I saw the Guillory, I was like, I'm definitely dealing with a relative.
That Guillory he's mentioning is my parental grandmother. Alex shared that she was part of a huge class of very well-off, fair-skinned people of color in Louisiana. And what was most surprising for me to learn, the Guillorys descended from slave owners.
It's reversed to the common narrative that we hear that only whites own slaves, but in your family, well, in our family, the free blacks actually own slaves, and our white family members from the legitimate family actually worked on our plantations.
Alex said the Eaglin family farm we own today belonged to my grandfather's side of the family and is completely separate from the Guillory plantation.
This is a record dated in 1881 of the origins of their property being passed down to the different heirs. Rosalie Eaglin, which is your ancestor's sister, she selling land to her mom, Charity Ann Gardner.
And then that property just got passed down, I guess, in the Eaglin line?
Exactly, and that's where you have it right here.
These records shared something no one in my family knew. This land had been in our family for over 141 years. Alex said the Eaglin property could have been purchased with pensions from serving in the military or with savings that the Eaglins were able to accumulate from decent jobs in the area. I then headed to the Academy of the Sacred Heart, a 200-year-old Catholic school where a memorial to the enslaved members of the Eaglin family stands today.
So there were actually Eaglins who were enslaved here, right?
There were, yes. Jenny Eaglin. She was married to Frank Hawkins.
Caroline is a historian at the school and oversees the on-site museum.
And where did the Eaglins come from?
They came from Maryland. That was where Frank and Jenny had been. They were enslaved there, and then the families who owned them moved to Louisiana.
So interesting, and that kind of aligns with the Harriet Eaglin that I identified from Maryland, who was sold by the Jesuits down to this similar area. So do you think that there could be some connection with that?
I think just the The size of the Eaglin family, the connections with Maryland, with Louisiana, I think there most definitely is a relation there.
There was one other surprise Caroline had for me. One of the staff members at Sacred Heart was an Eaglin herself.
Sharon, our ancestors were enslaved here. How does it feel being on these grounds?
It feels amazing. It's an opportunity most people are not going to be able to get.
Sharon found out about her connection to the Eaglins after she started working here.
The names you see here, they are the ones that did live in the slave quarters. You know, as you look around, you see other Eaglins in the graveyard. So they're home.
My Eaglin reporting there. We'll be right back.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Harry Styles!
News is happening now.
To look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Can you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive.
News is happening now.
To look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Breaking news first on NBC News Now. United in grief, millions across the UK and around the world pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth. How people everywhere are honoring the longest-serving monarch in British history. Addressing the nation, King Charles delivers his address, his message to the British people about the future of the monarchy. And crowning achievement, we will look back at the Queen's legacy of leadership alongside 13 American presidents. It is noon now on the West Coast, 3 p.m. here at NBC News headquarters in New York. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Aaron Gilchrist, and we begin this hour with the dawn of a new era in the United Kingdom. King Charles III addressing the world following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II.
Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family.
The Queen was a living symbol of Great Britain and its culture for decades. 10 days of mourning now underway across the United Kingdom. The people of England continue to flock to Buckingham Palace to place flowers or offer a moment of silent reflection. This hour, we will take a look at the Queen's legacy and to the future, the challenges facing Britain's new king. Leading us off this hour, NBC News correspondent Matt Bradley and royal commentator Daisy McAndrew as well. Matt, we'll start with you here. What have we heard from King Charles today?
Well, we heard from King Charles essentially a dedication to the duties that he now inherits from his late mother. He went on to describe how he would follow in her footsteps in committing himself to a life of service. Now, of course, this is very interesting because while his mother was the longest ever serving British monarch, he was the longest ever waiting heir. He waited for decades in order to assume this role, not necessarily in middle age, but as an elderly person. Now he will live out the rest of his life as the monarch, a position that he's waited for so long. Here's a little more of what now King Charles III had to say to the British public.
I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life.
And there was another emotional moment where the newly minted king addressed his dear mama as if he was speaking to her directly. It was another really poignant moment in what was a fairly emotional speech. Aaron?
A beautiful speech in so many ways at a time of mourning like this. Matt, Britain is beginning this mourning period. The nation is several days long. Can you give us a sense of what's expected to take place over the next few days?
Yeah, I mean, this is what the monarchy, this is what the royal family does best, kind of papering over this moment of mourning with pomp and circumstance, all of it steeped in symbolism. And it's going to be, as you mentioned, 10 days of mourning that's going to stretch from the top of the country all the way down to the bottom, where I am here in London in the south. The Queen's casket, the Queen's body, is still in Scotland, and she will be coming down in this direction slowly over the course of the next couple of days, where she will be lying in state. Then behind me, in the sort of Parliament compound area near Westminster Cathedral in the House of Commons, the public will be able to proceed past her and see her casket and give their own testimony, their own mourning period. Heads of state will also be meeting her, seeing her casket as it lies in state. There will then be a funeral, and then her casket will be moved to Windsor Castle, where she will be interred alongside her late husband. Aaron?
Matt Bradley in London for us today. Matt, thank you. I want to bring in NBC News royal commentator Daisy McAndrew now. Daisy, we appreciate you being here today. I'm hoping you can educate us a little bit. Not everyone here in the U.S. watches the royal family very closely. Can you give us a sense of what made Queen Elizabeth such a significant global figure?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's the obvious answer, Aaron, to that question, which is 70 years on the throne. No monarch has ever ruled for that long. So, but beyond that, it wasn't just that she stuck around for a long time. It was the sort of leader, the sort of head of state that she was. Her never putting a foot wrong, being very vocal behind the scenes, but publicly, being very discreet and diplomatic. She enabled this country to use her in a form of diplomacy, sending her around the world to smooth ruffled feathers, using her particularly, let's say, when she went to Dublin in 2011. Obviously, there have been many problems between the UK and Ireland over the years, and the issues of Northern Ireland and terrorism. She did this incredibly brave visit over there, spoke in Gaelic, and a year later she was shaking the hand of a former IRA terrorist. So whilst you can say she's not a politician with executive powers, but she has diplomatic soft power.
I'd like to ask you about King Charles now. No longer are the responsibilities of Prince Charles. We now have King Charles who has to get to work. What are the expectations for King Charles now in terms of making the monarchy relevant in 2022 in a modern era?
Well, exactly right. So we're entrusting the new King Charles to represent modern Britain and a modern royal family. But of course, they were looking at pictures of him there, and he's 73 years old. So that's it. And he's had the longest royal apprenticeship of any king or queen in the past. The oldest monarch in the past who's become king was 66. So his age is significant. And of course, we know a lot about him, whereas when the young queen, his mother, became queen, she was only 25. So this is a different scenario for him. But he's always had passionate interests, things like the environment, things like organic farming, architecture. Of course, he's now going to have to put a lot of those interests to the side and really concentrate on the day job of being king.
Very quickly, I do want to ask you, sort of regardless of what one thinks about the idea of a monarchy, people felt almost a familial connection to Queen Elizabeth, as I've understood over the last several hours of the reporting on this. Do you think that connection to the Queen, to the royal family, will continue now that she's gone?
That is the very big question, Aaron. That's the question everybody's asking themselves. I think the key of the Queen's popularity is we were all incredibly proud of her. She was our Queen, and she represented us so beautifully and so brilliantly that that's why people felt this great affinity to her. You were never embarrassed that she was our head of state. Having an embarrassing head of state is not good. We were all very, very proud of her. Now, can we transfer that pride to Charles? Will he earn that same devotion and pride? And that's what he's going to have to do.
And the world will continue to celebrate the Queen's life before moving on to that bit of business of the royal family in the weeks and months and years to come. Daisy McAndrew, we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. In our other headlines today, we are watching several developments in the court battle over the Mar-a-Lago search. The Justice Department has appealed a federal judge's order to appoint a third party to review documents taken last month. Today is also the deadline for the DOJ and the Trump legal team to submit that list of candidates for the so-called special master. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney is joining us now. So, Ken, I want to read part of the Justice Department's appeal here. We'll put it up on the screen as well. It says, quote, the injunction against using classified records in the criminal investigation could impede efforts to identify the existence of any additional classified records that are not being properly stored, which itself presents the potential for ongoing risk to national security. Help us really understand why this is so significant at this point.
Right. This is the crux of the Department of Justice's argument to this judge, to asking her to stay part of her order while they appeal to the 11th Circuit. And what they're saying is, just with respect to the 100 classified documents that they seized at Mar-a-Lago, they want her to let them use those, because what they're saying is, the intelligence community had started conducting a damage assessment of those documents to figure out whether any sources and methods were compromised. And the judge said, oh, you can still do that, but the FBI can't use them in the criminal investigation. The FBI is saying you can't separate those two things out. They're inextricably linked. We need to be able to investigate, for example, the empty envelopes marked classified that we found at Mar-a-Lago. So that's what they're asking her to do. And if she declines to do that, they're going to take it up to a higher court, Aaron.
The Trump legal team has until Monday morning to respond about this issue of a special master. What do we anticipate hearing from them?
I think if they have one angle here, one door that's left open, it's this question of executive privilege. They may argue that some of these classified documents may be subject to executive privilege. The DOJ argues that that's not possible because they cannot involve, confidential advice from a close advisor of the president. They are, after all, intelligence documents, products of the CIA, the National Security Agency, other kinds of documents. But that's what I expect to hear from the Trump side, Aaron.
All right, Ken Delaney for us in our D.C. newsroom today. Ken, thank you. President Biden is on his way to Delaware for the weekend after making a stop in Ohio today. The president was there to highlight manufacturing investments from the CHIPS Act he signed into law last month. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is joining us now. Monica, what did we hear from the president today?
Well, this was President Biden really touting a crucial legislative victory, Aaron, in a very important state for Democrats if they want to potentially pick up another seat in the Senate. So while this was an official White House visit, the president, of course, making this bigger pitch that will likely be one he echoes in the sprint to the midterms. Here's how he put into context the significance of that manufacturing bill and this new Intel facility for which they broke ground on today.
The future of the chip industry is going to be made in America. Made in America. The manufacture of these semiconductors connects countless small businesses and manufacturers into a supply chain that's going to thrive, all because of this law. Imagine if we had more of these kinds of factories across the country. This law makes that a reality.
So the CHIPS bill is really a $240 billion piece of legislation that is going to invest in that manufacturing. Since the U.S. has been beaten, it used to be really a leader of making these semiconductor chips that go into everything from your cell phone to medical devices, household appliances. So expect the president to continue to travel the country when they invest in this. And just as an example, that one plant in Intel, for instance, is going to be responsible for 3,000 full-time jobs. So that's another argument the president is going to use as he continues to talk about the recovering economy, Aaron.
Monica Alba for us in Washington today. Monica, thank you. California is facing two serious threats right now. Tropical Storm K is rapidly approaching, and wildfires are raging throughout that state. The mosquito fire in Northern California has burned more than 14,000 acres at this point, flames reaching 100 feet into the air in some places. Experts fear the fires in Southern California could actually get worse because of wind brought on by that tropical storm. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joining us now from Los Angeles. Steve, I want to start with that tropical storm, a rarity in that area. Talk to us about how people will be impacted.
Yeah, very much a rarity, that tropical storm sort of making its way up Mexico's Baja Peninsula. It will, of course, strike California with sudden bouts of rain, flash flooding, but it will kind of weaken as it goes up through the state. The tendrils extending, doing, possibly a lot of damage as far as flooding goes, definitely bringing a surge of rain to kind of end this heat wave, but causing a lot of problems. Right now, 8 million people under flood watches, 6 million under high wind warnings. So you're talking about 14 million people in the next 3 days impacted directly by this storm, but the ramifications past that it's not accounting for, like the scorched earth in California that could lead to mudslides. So many ramifications that officials are keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about that, Steve, in particular. You think rain would be a good thing with all the wildfires there, but talk to us a little bit more about why the experts are so concerned about this storm and how it could impact the threat of wildfires.
Rain is a great thing if it hits the direct area where the wildfire is. Unfortunately, what's going to hit those wildfires is hot wind that comes over these canyons, over these mountain ranges, turns into very generating, almost like a blast furnace into those fires. It could spin those fires up, spread them out even more miles than they're already traveling right now, endangering more houses. That's the threat. That's what officials are worried about, and they're worried about it just about at every wildfire in this state, because the ramifications of this tropical storm could spread as far as the Bay Area. That's how powerful this is. So a lot to worry about even before we get to the flash flooding.
Yeah, a lot to watch going into the weekend here. Steve Patterson for us in LA today. Steve, thank you.
Yep.
Ukrainian forces say they are pushing back against Russia in the east. Why the threat of nuclear disaster remains front and center. That's next. Right now on NBC News Now.
As we come on the air, here's what we know.
It has been dramatic, powerful.
We begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
We're getting out of this area right now because more air raid sirens are sounding.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Was there a school officer on campus? Because that's what we've been told.
No, fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
And the House has answered the call to create new gun laws.
The stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing on Capitol Hill.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
A terrifying night of flash floods.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge for primary purposes.
It's an interesting race here. I've just never covered anything like it.
This is big when we're talking about November.
How many doors do you think you've each knocked on?
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground on this issue?
What do you think when you see the activism that's happening right now?
Do you think this movement could have happened without social media?
A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage.
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Can you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive.
Parts of Europe on edge right now. The continent's largest nuclear power plant is dealing with attacks for another day in Ukraine. Shelling around the nuclear facility has led to power outages and growing fears of a nuclear catastrophe. The United Nations is warning the power plant is on the brink of disaster. NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is joining us live now from Kyiv. Megan, let's talk about that nuclear power plant. Bring us up to speed. What's happening there?
Yeah, Aaron, as you mentioned, a deteriorating situation. We know that there was shelling overnight within the last 24 hours. It knocked out power to the town that the plant sits in. So we're talking about thousands of people now who are in the dark. They don't have power. They don't have running water. They don't have sewage. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and there was a big concern for a humanitarian crisis. And the problem is we have no idea of knowing when the power is going to be restored. Meanwhile, as you know, we're talking about a power plant that's clinging to power. There's 6 reactors there. One is working. The International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors are saying they're considering shutting down that 6th reactor, where the plant would be working off of these backup diesel generators. The issue is there isn't an unlimited supply of diesel. And so that's why this is so critical, because that's where we could possibly see this nuclear disaster happen, Aaron.
And Megan, Ukraine seems to be making some progress on the battlefield, too, taking some land back from Russian control. Talk to us about that, how significant that is.
Oh, absolutely. So we have heard from President Zelensky within the last 24 hours saying that there's some big victories here for Ukraine. They launched this counteroffensive last week at the beginning of the week. So less than 2 weeks later, they're saying they've taken back dozens of settlements and towns from the east down into the south in the Kherson region. This is the area where we saw the Russians seize in the beginning of the invasion. Now there's this all-out push to try and get back as much land as possible as we head into these winter months, where it's going to be incredibly cold, Aaron.
Megan Fitzgerald for us in Kyiv, Ukraine again today. Megan, thank you. And still ahead, alone in America, hundreds of Afghan children are separated from their loved ones. Who's taking care of them and why the reunions are taking so long?
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
We're here to start conversations, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top story with Tom Yamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
It's the best time of the morning. Time for that pop start, baby.
Oh, I'm feeling the vibe today on the show.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back. A looming railroad dispute could deal a major blow to the economy. CNBC's Seema Moody joins us now with today's Money Minute. Seema, let's start with the rail workers dispute, obviously, here. Walk us through the issues at play here and how a strike could actually impact the overall economy.
Well, it certainly could affect the economy, Aaron. Deadline is forthcoming to avoid a national rail strike that could impact about 49 states across the nation, not to mention major ports. The overall cost to the economy estimated at around $2 billion, with the unions fighting for better work conditions and better work scheduling. The negotiation does expire on September 16th, so expect that to be a news event to watch next week.
And Seema, one of the top gun makers in this country is reporting a pretty steep decline in sales. What's the company blaming for this decline?
Yeah, so Smith & Wesson is describing it as a challenging quarter as profits fell. CEO Mark Smith said the industry is experiencing its first normal summer slowdown in 3 years. Remember, demand for guns had surged in late 2021 and early 2022 amid the pandemic and civil unrest. The CEO also talked about some inventory issues as well.
All right, Seema Modi at CNBC for us today. Seema, thank you. A dangerous new TikTok challenge is taking off on social media. The videos show teens stealing cars off the street using a USB cord. Here's CNBC's Andrea Day.
These are just some of the wild videos posted on TikTok. The cars stolen in just seconds, taken on joyrides, and left on the side of the road.
They practically flipped my into a trap house. They had a really, really great time in here, actually.
And behind the wheel, investigators say young teens.
We had an 11-year-old who was one of our most prolific stealers. So the notion that they can drive a car is a fantasy.
In Chicago, Illinois, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart.
The number of 13, 14, 12-year-olds we have, we really don't necessarily count them and tally them because there's so many of them.
It's all part of a social media challenge with more than 33 million views on TikTok alone using the hashtag Kia Boys.
The viral nature of how this has taken off on social media has accelerated this like we've never seen. In our jurisdiction alone, they've gone up over 800% just in the last month, and we see no end in sight.
He says the challenge is to snatch a parked car off the street by popping off the steering column and then hot wiring it with a USB cable.
We see them in the video just pulling it out where they've been charging their phone, and now that's their key.
The target? Certain models of Kias and Hyundais that use a mechanical key, not a key fob with a push-button start. Like Karen Perkins' 2019 Kia Sorento.
I looked out of the window and realized my car was gone.
Days later, she was in a rental at a red light when her missing Kia drove right past her.
I saw a teenage boy sitting in the front. I drove around the block. 5 kids actually jumped into my car. That's when I really started to panic. So I was like, I'm going to lose my car forever.
She went on a hunt to track it down, later finding it deserted on the side of the road. And take a look at the damage.
They crashed the front of my car. They damaged the bumper. They wrote on the top of my ceiling, it says hot car.
I tracked down one of the Kia boys and spoke with him by phone. He says he's a 14-year-old in Fort Worth, Texas, and tells me that so far he swiped 15 cars and does it for fun. A representative for TikTok tells CNBC TikTok does not condone this behavior, which violates our policies and will be removed if found on our platform.
It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and we've never seen anything like this.
The manufacturer ought to be paying for this.
Ken McLean is an attorney in Missouri and blames the stealing spree on automakers, claiming the companies built cars that are too easy to steal. He calls it a defect, and his firm has filed class action lawsuits so far in 12 states.
We're receiving dozens of calls a day.
McLean estimates about 1 million vehicles are affected from over the past decade, and a security fix for the vehicles would cost about $200 per car.
It's easy to project that this could be a $200 million problem.
So what are the car makers doing about it? A spokesperson for Kia tells CNBC, Kia America has provided steering wheel lock devices at no cost to law enforcement in affected areas to deter vandalism and theft. And Hyundai? We will continue to support local police departments to make steering wheel locks available for affected Hyundai owners. Additionally, beginning October 1st, 2022, a security kit will be available for purchase.
After the break, the new king, a closer look at who Charles really is and what the monarchy may look like under his leadership.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Yamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Bottom of the hour now, Maya Eaglin has a look at what we're watching. Hey, Maya.
Hey, Aaron, 5 people were killed in a shooting in the Hebron Hill community in Maryland. A county sheriff's office spokesperson confirmed on Facebook that there's not a current threat to the public. Police haven't released any further details. A hiker in California was found dead after he vanished while on a search to find help for his girlfriend, who was suffering from heat exhaustion. Officials found his body Thursday and confirmed that his girlfriend was rescued on Sunday. Her condition is unknown. And the Mega Millions jackpot winner has only a few weeks left to decide how they'd like to receive their prize. The $1.34 billion jackpot was sold in Illinois and has still not been claimed. The winner has 60 days to decide if they want a lump sum or payments over 30 years. Aaron.
All right, Maya, thank you. The United Kingdom has now entered an uncertain new era. King Charles III addressed the world a short time ago as mourners flooded the gates of Buckingham Palace to honor his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth.
To my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years.
This new role for King Charles is one he has been preparing for his entire life. We continue our coverage this hour, starting with NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons in London today. Hi, Keir.
Hey, Aaron, and what a day we've had watching history happen. King Charles now evening here in London, ending his first full day as king in Buckingham Palace behind me there. That speech tried to mirror the comments of his mother in so many speeches before, promising continuity and stability and duty, but at the same time, Aaron, ushering in small amounts of change. Just as an example, William and Kate, now the Prince and Princess of Wales. That title, Princess of Wales, of course, last held by Diana. There were the rhymes of history in that speech, but also a message from Prince Charles, carefully woven about his love for his mom, about the importance of duty, and about what kind of king he would be.
He's the longest-serving heir to the throne in British history. At the age of 73, Charles, the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth, is now King Charles III. The country's first look at King Charles, travelling to London this morning to assume his duties. In a statement calling his mother's death a moment of the greatest sadness for me and for all the members of my family. In popularity, Charles still trails his mother and his sons and their wives, with only 11% choosing him as their favourite royal. But arguably, no one is more ready to be king. Charles groomed from the age of 4 when his mother was crowned queen. As a boy, he was shy, lonely, an average student, and no sportsman, calling his school in Scotland pure hell.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, will become your liege man of life and limb.
At 20, he became Prince of Wales and began to blossom, hunting, playing polo, a pilot in the Air Force, 5 years in the Royal Navy, where he commanded a ship.
I thee wed.
I thee wed.
Charles may be best known as the man who married Princess Diana, a fairy tale wedding seemingly doomed from the beginning.
And I suppose in love. Whatever in love means.
Public opinion of him plummeting after their acrimonious divorce and Diana's tragic death. Ever since, he's tried to improve his image, ultimately marrying Camilla, who will now take the title of Queen Consort. He became the hardest working member of the royal family, founding charities like the Prince's Trust, helping nearly 1 million disadvantaged young people, and championing causes like environmental protection, long before they were fashionable.
Do we want to go down in history as the people who did nothing to bring the world back from the brink?
Now King Charles has vowed to avoid controversial campaigns as monarch, just as his mother did. Over the last months, as her health weakened, he's assumed more of her duties. One of his first expected plans to slim down the size of the monarchy and reduce its financial drain on the public. Still, his biggest challenge may be healing the rift with his son Harry after his royal departure.
I will always love him, but there's a lot of hurt that's happened.
Now, as his family gathers around Charles, the eyes of the world are on him like never before.
And of course, Aaron, in that speech today, he expressed love for Harry and Meghan, trying to heal those rifts. He said, "My life will change." He's going to need to leave those controversies behind as Prince of Wales and step up to the role as King Charles.
So much change happening so quickly there. Keir Simmons for us in London today. Keir, thank you. Joining me now is Stephanie Petit, People Magazine's Royals writer and reporter. Stephanie, we appreciate you being here. We want folks to know that the commemorative issue of People honoring the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth is out. We can see the covers here. Let's talk, though, Stephanie, about King Charles, naming Prince William and Princess Kate the Prince and Princess of Wales today. Help us understand the significance behind those titles and their new responsibilities.
Yes, as his father's heir, Prince William will inherit this title of Prince of Wales. This was expected, but at the same time, for Charles to say this the day after his mother's death is very significant, and it shows he has trust in his son. And of course, Kate, she'll be the Princess of Wales. And of course, this is a title that was previously held by Princess Diana. It was so closely associated with Princess Diana that when Camilla married Charles in 2005, she took on a lesser title of the Duchess of Cornwall, and that's how she's been known in recent years. So this is a big step for them. They're going to have even more duties. And of course, with this slimmed down monarchy that we're seeing, that they have so many responsibilities, as well as raising their 3 children who are still very young.
You know, I was struck by so many of the images we saw today in particular, and I think we have the video of King Charles now walking the line here, shaking hands, people kissing his hands. Not necessarily unusual for Prince Charles, but to see the King of England pressing the flesh, as it were, is this an effort for him to begin ingratiating himself to the people of the United Kingdom as king?
Yes, absolutely. And we had reporters on the ground at Buckingham Palace. They said the mood was less somber than you'd expect. They were cheering for Charles. There were hip hip hoorays and people singing God Save the King. So people are clearly accepting him as their monarch. This is significant, though. It's a big change. And for him to get out there and shake hands with people, you know, the Queen was always known for having her gloves on. She was more reserved. And maybe Charles will be a little more showing his emotions. We saw that a little bit in his speech today. So who knows? There could be some adjustments that we're all going to have to make, as he's a totally different person than his mother.
Indeed. Stephanie Petit, we appreciate your time today. Thank you. Now, Queen Elizabeth's death is also resonating with Americans, many of whom have never known another British monarch. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker has a look at the Queen's very special relationship with the U.S.
Aaron, the Queen's death is being felt across the U.S. Here in Washington, President Biden saying she helped make our relationship special. It was a bond that was forged in meetings with 13 sitting presidents and an American audience who adored her.
She belonged to Britain, but America is mourning too. Queen Elizabeth's remarkable reign spanned nearly 1/3 the life of this nation.
This just seemed like such a significant moment, the passing of this woman who's been kind of the stalwart figure in the back of our minds for the past 70 years.
President Biden saying she was more than a monarch. She defined an era, and paying his respects at the British Embassy in Washington. The tributes also pouring in from presidents past, including Donald Trump saying, "What a grand and beautiful lady she was. There was nobody like her." Former President Obama, "We were struck by her warmth, the way she put people at ease." And former President George W. Bush, "She set the standard for steady and dedicated service." Personal remembrances born out of relationships forged over the years, meeting every U.S. president except Lyndon Johnson, dating back to Harry Truman, whom she visited as a 25-year-old princess, then representing her father, the king, only to return to the White House as a queen in 1957.
I also want to say how much I appreciate the warmth and friendliness of your reception.
Visits punctuated by pomp and pageantry, and she appeared to enjoy America's pastimes, watching a baseball game with the first President Bush, and turning the Kentucky Derby into a royal affair during the second Bush presidency, often at the center of powerful moments. That famous dance with President Ford at the White House. Becoming the first British monarch to address Congress, sharing her love of horses with President Reagan, and showing her support after 9/11, ordering the British troops to play America's national anthem. And while her last trip to the U.S. was in 2007, every president since has visited the palace. Two countries now bonded in grief for a monarch, a matriarch, Her Majesty.
President Biden had met the Queen twice, once as senator and once last year as president, when he said her grace reminded him of his mother. There is truly no higher praise there. We do expect the president to attend her funeral. Aaron.
Kristen Welker reporting for us there. Now, Queen Elizabeth was not just royalty. She was also one of the most recognizable figures in the world, a celebrity, if we're really being honest. Over the course of her 70 years on the throne, she became a towering figure in pop culture. The Today Show anchor Chanel Jones has more on her lasting impact on art and entertainment.
Her royal image became iconic during her 70-year reign. Queen Elizabeth II, dressed in eye-catching colors and her signature pearls, always accessorized with that top-handle handbag in the crook of her arm. It's no wonder Her Highness has inspired everything from street art to pop art, T-shirts to coffee mugs, and of course, TV and movies.
The Queen has been depicted in popular culture more than any other person, really, because she is a global icon.
Countless stars across the globe themselves starstruck by her presence, including Hollywood royalty Meryl Streep, fashion icon Anna Wintour, and pop star Lady Gaga. But it's the world of fiction that truly had a ball with the Queen's likeness.
Arise, Sir Austin Powers.
She's been portrayed on film and imagined in animation.
Gentlemen, do not steal ladies' crowns!
And, of course, spoofed in sketches.
I want to get away from you.
No, you can't get away from me because I'm on the money, ain't I? I'm on the money, and you're on it.
Prince Harry speaking with Hoda earlier this year about his grandmother's unwavering ability to laugh.
What's the best thing about her?
To be honest with you, it's her sense of humour and her ability to see the humour in so many different things.
While only a select few had a chance to see the lighter side of the late monarch, millions have wondered what went on behind palace walls. The drama played up on the silver screen with an Oscar-winning performance by Helen Mirren in The Queen.
As a matter of fact, is how I think best on my feet. You know, I've never been one for sitting around endlessly.
In 2016, Netflix's The Crown helped spark a renaissance of royal fascination.
It's not as easy as it looks.
But beyond the dozens of depictions, nothing came close to the real deal. Those rare features of the true Queen never failed to steal the show.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
From her grand entrance with James Bond at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in London to a tour of the Game of Thrones set where she could view but not sit on the Iron Throne.
And we kept getting told the same thing, which is she's not allowed to sit on other thrones, fictional or otherwise.
The iconic Queen and all of her glory, leaving an impact on pop culture that will continue to carry on.
Chanel Jones reporting there. A state of emergency in our nation's capital. Why Washington, D.C. is taking a drastic step to help nearly 10,000 migrants.
What do you love about fatherhood?
The chaos, the learning. Is climate change one of your top priorities?
What's your message to girls who want to make a difference in their own communities?
Believe in yourself.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top story with Tom Yamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
We're getting a clearer picture of just how many Afghan children have been resettled in the U.S. over the last year. According to the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement, more than 230 children in the country are in this country alone, but many of their families still remain in Afghanistan. NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now. Julia, help us understand this. How did these children get to the U.S. and how are they being taken care of without their parents?
Yeah, I couldn't believe the numbers myself, Aaron, when I saw them, but we did confirm through HHS, that's Health and Human Services, the agency responsible for taking care of unaccompanied children, that there are 104 children still in federal custody, and then 130 in the custody of states and nonprofits and shelters. All of those children, they say, have family members and parental guardians in Afghanistan. And so what's troubling is that it's very hard to be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Definitely not a speedy reunion, because it is so increasingly hard to get Afghans out of Afghanistan after the U.S. pulled out of there. The Taliban took over last year. So those children now likely to be placed in foster care. In fact, some of them are in temporary foster situations right now. But it very well likely could be that they end up getting permanently placed with a family that is found for them through the U.S. government.
If that happens, if that doesn't happen, I should say, and I understand that it wouldn't be a speedy process to reunite these kids, but what's being done to try to get these kids and their parents back together?
Well, they certainly are able to track them. The problem is right now, the U.S. is asking for neighboring countries around Afghanistan to open up their borders, make it easier for people to get out of Afghanistan into neighboring countries so that they can be lifted out of there. There's a lot of talks about working with the Emiratis, the Qataris, other third-party countries where these people could safely go to and then be lifted to the United States. That's what the State Department is calling for now, but really it's a lot harder to get Afghans out. There's more efforts to try to get Americans out of Afghanistan, but it is, and as you see there from the State Department spokesperson, just really getting increasingly hard to get Afghans, even those who worked very closely with the United States, out of Afghanistan. And a lot of these people made the very hard decision to evacuate their children and stay behind themselves.
Difficult situation for sure. Keep us posted on this. Julia Ainsley in D.C., thank you. The mayor of Washington, D.C. declaring a state of emergency now because of the influx of migrants being bused to the nation's capital from the southern U.S. border. This comes after the Pentagon denied the mayor's request to deploy the D.C. National Guard to help with the migrant crisis. Since April, the buses have been arriving almost daily. More than 9,000 asylum seekers have passed through D.C. so far. Roughly 350 of them are being housed in hotels, and about 70 children have been enrolled in D.C. public schools. There is much more news ahead. You're watching NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Can you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive. From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Have you ever tried to track down your ancestry? It can be a revealing and startling experience. Our Maya Eaglin did just that. It led her to Louisiana on a journey of discovery.
Growing up, every pilgrimage to Louisiana started with some morning call beignets.
So we used to come here every summer. How does it feel to be back?
For me, this is an adventure. When I was your age, I didn't know that much about our family background. You are helping your father to discover more about, our ancestry.
Recently, I learned that my family descends from both slave owners and enslaved Africans. I made these discoveries after finding Harriet Eaglin, a 6-year-old girl enslaved at Georgetown University in the 1800s. After learning about my complicated lineage, I was eager to share my findings back on the land where this all started. Today, my uncle lives on and manages the family farm.
Tell me what it was like growing up on the farm.
It was a good life. It was really fun, a lot of hard work. It was a comfortable, quiet environment to grow up in as a kid.
Coming here every summer, I just so enjoyed running around, hanging out with Alex, driving on your tractor. When you were growing up, did you all ever talk about the history of the land or how we even got the farm?
Yes, occasionally you would hear one of the uncles or aunts that would speak about how they may have, ended up here. Unfortunately, I don't remember all of those conversations quite as well.
We were kids. The adults may have had discussions. We were a Creole family. We knew a bit about our roots. Your maternal grandparents only spoke Creole.
What can you share about the property now?
Well, the property now is the great pride of our family. Your uncle has taken on the yeoman's chore of keeping it going. This is a piece of the earth that we are connected to. No matter what happens to this land in the future, as far as the eye could see, there were rows and rows, acres of sweet potato. The fact that that ranch land has now been turned into homes, that people have come out here, are enjoying the fresh air, all of the things that we know this rural area offers, it's great. Progress, you can't stop progress.
Our farm isn't alone in this new reality. The USDA has shown a steady decline in the number of farms in the country. In 2021, there were just a little over 2 million, down 200,000 from 2007. And aside from developments, our family is also uncertain of who will take care of this property next.
Honestly, Dad, one of my fears is that our land could look like that one day. What would it mean to you if we had to say goodbye?
I would insist that there be some kind of notation here with the family name on it. And I see you are tearing up about it, honey. Listen, I know how much great memories you have for this land here, this place. You grew up here. And in the end, trust your uncle and your aunt to do the right thing, and that this land will be here. I can't promise you that we won't have these monstrosities encroaching here, but listen, you should always, and your sister should always feel comfortable that you had the opportunity to know about your grandmother here, and the times that you had with your cousins, fireworks, all of the great things
so
that
fun.
you did here. You know,
yeah, it was really fun.
Those memories will never go away.
Maya joins us now. What a beautiful story.
Thank you.
And so it's such a personal story to share with the rest of us. And obviously your father talked about the fact that you were getting choked up there a little bit. And I would imagine it's because this is your history, right? This is what connects you to the life you didn't know before you existed.
Absolutely. And I can relate to my uncle, too, my dad. We didn't ask these questions when we were running around on the farm just having a good time. But looking at those documents, seeing my great-great-aunt and uncle signing the deed, you know, it was really incredible to see in person.
And you want to be able to, I would imagine, pass those stories on to the next generation of Eaglins.
That's the hope. And so many of these farms are disappearing because of developing, you know, home developments and other things like that. So
well, thank you so much for sharing it with us. Really appreciate it. Maya Eaglin, thanks. And thank you for joining us this hour. I'm Aaron Gilchrist. You can get your news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right here on NBC News Now.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
If it's Friday, Vice President Kamala Harris sits down with Chuck Todd for a Meet the Press exclusive, delivering a scathing critique of the Supreme Court as Democrats focus on abortion heading into the midterms. We've got the very first piece of that exclusive interview ahead. Plus, King Charles on the world stage for the very first time as king, addressing a nation in mourning from Buckingham Palace. His remarks and the Queen's extraordinary legacy ahead. And Congress campaigns and the rising threat of political violence. I'll talk to one of the House's top Democrats, Pramila Jayapal, about the increasingly toxic political climate and why it is personal for her. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in for Chuck Todd, who is in Houston today for an exclusive interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. We are getting the very first look at their one-on-one conversation in just a moment. That exclusive sit-down is happening as the White House ramps up its midterm messaging with election season in full swing now. President Biden hit the trail again last night at a party event in Maryland, laying out the White House's roadmap for Democratic campaigns across the country.
So I want to be crystal clear about what's at stake in the ballot. Your right to choose is on the ballot. No, this is a fact. These are not, it's not hyperbole, any of this. Your Social Security that you paid for is on the ballot. Your safety of your kids from gun violence is on the ballot. The survival of our planet is literally on the ballot. Your right to vote, even our democracy is on the ballot. Are you ready to fight for these things?
Well, as you just heard the president say, abortion is on the ballot, and that is now quite literally true in Michigan. That is a state where the state Supreme Court yesterday allowed a referendum on abortion to make it onto the ballot this November. And as we saw over the summer in Kansas, that could be a big motivating factor for voters. Now, in his exclusive interview with the vice president, Chuck asked Vice President Harris about her confidence in the Supreme Court after its ruling earlier this year to overturn Roe v. Wade. She did not mince words.
We have some polling that shows confidence in the Supreme Court is at its lowest level that we've measured in over 20 years. How much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court?
I think this is an activist court.
What does that mean?
It means that we had an established right for almost half a century, which is the right of women to make decisions about their own body as an extension of what we have decided to be the privacy rights to which all people are entitled. And this court took that constitutional right away. And we are suffering as a nation because of it. That causes me great concern about the integrity of the court overall, especially as someone who my life was inspired by people like Thurgood Marshall, the work on that court of Earl Warren to bring a unanimous court to pass Brown v. Board of Education. This is the court that once sat Earl Warren and Thurgood Marshall. Sandra Day O'Connor. It's a very different court.
Some very powerful language there from the vice president. And you can see much more of Chuck's full interview with Vice President Harris on Sunday morning on Meet the Press. You do not want to miss that. My NBC News colleague Monica Alba is outside the White House monitoring this breaking news for us and these breaking developments. What we are hearing from the vice president, Monica, really astounding. You heard her refer to the Supreme Court as an activist court. We've been looking through our files, right, Mon? We can't really find any evidence that she or the president or frankly anyone else at the White House has used that type of language before. What do you make of it?
It's certainly a sharper tone, Kristen, that's right, and it does continue on this sentiment that both the vice president and the president have expressed all summer long since Roe fell, and that is that this is a court that does have some extreme ideology. That was the language that was used in the days after the decision, and we have seen the vice president really take this on as one of her main responsibilities. She has dedicated a ton of time in the last couple of months meeting with state legislatures from 17 different states, traveling, crisscrossing the country to deeply red and purple states to try to make this argument and to talk about the importance, she says, of protecting reproductive rights. But you're right to point out that she hasn't used this specific forceful language in those exact words of calling it an activist court. And you saw there her expansion and defense of that position in the interview with Chuck that will air in full on Sunday, talking about specifically what she compares it to in terms of thinking back to court of yesteryear. And what's notable here is that really that line of attack of an activist court is something that Republicans used to talk about liberals back in the 60s and 70s. So we are seeing a shift here, and this is perhaps something that the White House is going to be using as a strategy heading into the midterm elections. You saw President Biden there discussing this, of course, at a DNC fundraiser. And in that primetime speech in Philadelphia last week, he talked specifically about the rights. And while not saying abortion in such explicit terms, he was implying that and talking about these extreme MAGA forces that are threatening that as part of everything he was talking about when it comes to his views on that being a threat to democracy. So abortion, certainly an issue this White House sees as energizing voters, given what we saw in Kansas and in some other special elections. They think heading into November, that is a message that can resonate, and clearly, again, a different tone from the vice president, extending what she has said in the past, but making it a little bit more intense in that interview heading into this final midterm stretch, Kristen.
And Monica, as you make all of those great points, we're looking at some live pictures of the vice president in Houston at an event there. So, Monica, just let's talk strategy. I want to pick up on one of the key points that you made, which is that we are seeing this broader sharpening of rhetoric from the president, who's talking about MAGA Republicans. He's gotten criticized from some Democrats who are concerned that it's too heated, that he could actually alienate some independent voters, some voters who are needed to win in some of these very close and critical races all across the country. So do you think that this type of language from the vice president could fall into that category, could potentially be a step too far from the perspective of some voters?
It's possible, and when we talk about this discussion of some Democrats being a little wary, look no further than today, where the president was traveling outside of Columbus, Ohio, to tout this manufacturing bill and legislative victory. But of course, there's a political backdrop to it. He appeared and alongside Congressman Tim Ryan, who's running in that Senate race, who has been a little hesitant to appear with President Biden or campaign with him. And the president today did praise Representative Ryan. He said he really his work was important, and he talked specifically about his leadership. But what was notable is that when asked by reporters whether Joe Biden should run again in 2024, Congressman Ryan, who in the past has had a similar answer, said it's really up to him. He didn't give him a full-throated endorsement or say definitively, yes, Joe Biden should run for re-election. So that's an interesting part of all of this. But it's also, as we talk about in Ohio, in a state that many millions of voters turned out to support former President Trump, that's a place where Democrats would like to get some voters and make some inroads. And so that's why you have this sort of debate and tight line that Congressman Ryan is walking. And that was very evident today. So is it possible that could extend to these remarks by Vice President Harris? I think it does fall into that category and bucket for sure, Kristen, possibly.
I'm so glad you highlight that point, Monica. I'm going to have my panel coming up weigh in on that very thing. So thank you, Monica. Appreciate that. Great analysis at the top. Joining me now on set is my panel, Maria Hinojosa, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, anchor of the Latino USA podcast, and an NBC News political analyst. Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster, and also an NBC News political analyst, and former George W. Bush speechwriter and senior editor at The Atlantic, David Frum. Thanks to all of you for being here. I do want to get you to weigh in on the politics that Monica was talking about in terms of Tim Ryan not answering that question. But I want to start with this news that Chuck got in his interview with the vice president. Maria, let's just have you kick this off. I mean, that is very strong language. Chuck pressed her on what she thinks of the Supreme Court. She could have answered in a range of different ways, and she decided to label the court an activist court. What do you make of that language?
It's refreshing. As a woman who, and you know, I'm very public and I tell the truth, right? I had 2 abortions when I was a very young woman, even though I was using birth control. And so to see the vice president say it is an activist court is affirming what many of us are feeling. So it's like thank you, we're not being gaslit anymore. We understand that this is an activist court and that we are, as women, and I love the fact that the vice president clearly said this is about privacy. Everybody's always talking about reproductive rights, abortion, this. It's about privacy. So I'm really glad that she made it very clear. I would have gone further. I would have said, and that's why we're going to think about and discuss very seriously about expanding the court, because we are challenged by an activist court now.
David, what's your take?
I think we are going to find that the country is better for where we have been on these in the past weeks. We are taking an issue that has been assigned to lawyers and pulling it to the voting booth. And the country's never found a stable resting place, never a consensus that Americans could live by. And I think what has happened is a lot of the Republicans have had a free kick, a free soccer kick, where they could take much more extreme positions than their own voters wanted. And by bringing this into the political realm, I think 2022 will be very clarifying that the Republican position, as it's been enunciated, is not tenable. The party has to find a new one.
What do you make of the vice president being the first one, though, really, in the administration to use that type of language?
Well, maybe I'm a journalist and I'm used to stronger language. Activist sounds like, actually, I don't agree that that's strong language at all. That's about the least strong thing she could say. I think it's a little bit like saying, you know, inappropriate, tough words.
Cornell?
Well, I got to agree with David. I kind of chuckled because it's not tough language for campaign season.
What is notable to me, though, is that she's getting out in front of the president. I mean, we have not heard him use language, whether you want to call it strong or not. We haven't heard him use that term, right? And she's getting out in front with this, and she has really been forceful. I mean, do you expect her to be the point person, the front person, the face of this push that the administration is making, and clearly Democrats more broadly, to make this an issue in the midterms?
Well, it's election time, right? And for the president and for the vice president, time for cutting deals, trying to cut deals, and the 50-50 Senate are over. It's election season. So you do see them rolling out more tough language and trying to, in fact, define the terms of what the fall election is going to be about, using that bully pulpit. The president has absolutely, given great speeches on this, trying to define this, but the vice president is an important voice in this because she is a unique vice president. And she's not just a political figure, she's a cultural figure. She's the first woman to ever be this, and so many young women look up to her, and she's the first woman of color this. So she has a powerful voice in this, and she can connect with voters in ways that, quite frankly, a lot of us men can't connect with her. So I think she's a very important voice for the fall.
We talk about the impact of abortion on the midterms, and obviously everyone talks about Kansas. And what we say about Kansas is that's an example where abortion was literally on the ballot. Well, now we have another one in Michigan. Becomes yet another state where abortion is on the ballot. Maria, to what extent does that drive up, do you think, turnout? To what extent does that have an impact on what we see, not just in Michigan, but in other of these key states where maybe it's not so specifically on the ballot, but a key issue that a candidate is raising?
I'm a Midwesterner. I'm from Chicago. I mean, I'm a Mexican immigrant, but Midwesterners, we're kind of earnest in that sense. And what we heard from the vice president in that this is a court that is taking away rights, that resonates with all people, not just women.
And what about Latinos? Do you think that what will the impact be broadly? And obviously, it's going to be different depending on what state, what community we're talking about.
Well, look, the Latino vote on the issue of abortion is actually complicated as I've been saying, Latino voters, Latina voters were complicated. And actually, there is a big push to get Latinos and Latinas to kind of be staunchly anti-abortion. So many young Latinas, the first protest rally that they'll go to is not a pro-immigrant rally. It will be an anti-abortion rally. They have been working on this for decades, right? It's one of the reasons why I believe Florida went for Donald Trump. But Latinas have abortions at the rate that everybody else does. So this is a very personal issue as well, an issue of privacy. But I do think that this is going to rev up women. And there are Trump supporters who are women, who I speak to, who are pro-choice. So it will deflate, I think, their interest in coming out.
How nervous does that make some Republicans, David, to hear that?
Look, the Republican and Democratic Party do not work at all in the same way. The Democratic coalition is much bigger, but it's more divided, more disparate. So whereas if you're trying to get Republicans together to get to vote, you think about what is the one big issue that most Republicans care about, talk about that and deliver them to the polls in one big phalanx. With Democrats, you're activating issue after issue. There are a lot of people who are going to vote for Joe Biden in 2024 who do not like his domestic agenda at all. That's why he never talks, for example, about the student loan relief. When he goes through his accomplishments, that was to activate a particular constituency, even though it's generally not all that popular. And again, so it's a matter of opening up the faucets of the Democratic Party one by one, understanding they often disagree, they often may not even get along all that well.
I will say this, and going back to your point about Latino voters, here is the fundamental problem with what the Supreme Court did. It is, we see in a lot of data, even people who are supposedly pro-life don't like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, because it does become an issue about privacy. It does become an issue about rights. And what we're seeing, and again, you look at Kansas. When you get the 60% of the vote in Kansas, that's not just Democrats, because Lord knows we don't have 60% of the vote in Kansas is Democrat. And state after state, and when you look at Michigan, there's an opportunity to peel off probably a quarter of Republican women who, quite frankly, may not be pro-choice as we think about it, but don't like what the state's doing.
Go ahead, David, and then I want to play something that we heard from Joe Biden.
That's how we're going
night.
to get a national resolution. The Republicans have been occupying a position on abortion that their own party doesn't actually support because it was free. It's now not free. And the Supreme Court may, in the end, have done this country an enormous favor by putting the United States on the path to a resolution that more Americans can live with than could live with it before.
Yeah. I want to play a little bit of what we heard from Joe Biden. This was last night. This is on the stakes in November. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Imagine if we just elected 2 more Democrats to the Senate and keep the House of Representatives. Imagine. We'll codify Roe v. Wade. We'll ban assault weapons. We'll protect Social Security and Medicare. We'll pass universal pre-K. We'll restore the child care tax credit. We'll protect voting rights. We'll pass election reform. We'll make sure no one ever tries to steal an election again in America. And we'll continue to build an economy.
It's a long list, Maria, and can't be done through reconciliation. I mean, what he's basically saying, it seems like, is let's get rid of the filibuster to get all of this stuff done. I mean, is that a winning message? Do you think that's an effective strategy looking forward?
Look, I think anything that makes Joe Biden look like he's standing up and he's angry and he's kind of had enough, his speech in Philadelphia, where some people are saying it's too much, our democracy is in peril. Our democracy is in peril. And to not be forceful, so that, yeah, it's a long list, but I'm like, hi, Joe. Yeah, let's see more of this. I think it will, in fact, inspire some people. Not everybody, but some.
So, and yet, Cornell, the president's getting more fiery in his language, and yet you have, as Monica said in her reporting, Tim Ryan in Ohio not willing to say, yes, Joe Biden should run again in 2024. These candidates still have to walk a very fine line.
Well, they do, but I also, I worked one time for a guy by the name Barack Obama, and after going into 2010, a lot of Democrats were saying the same thing about, I mean, you remember there were people saying that Barack Obama shouldn't run again. Sure. So I think, I'm going to put that absurdity aside. What I think is really important about what the president is doing, and some of them say, well, did he go too far? Look at Reuters polling that just came out. And, a majority of Americans now see Donald Trump and his movement as a threat to democracy. I don't know, call me crazy, but maybe, just maybe, a Democrat or the president should actually try to drive a message as opposed to sitting back and waiting. So all those people who say that he went too far, look at that data where Americans are right now and tell me he should not have driven that message.
We're 2 months out from the midterms, David. Does this type of language seem like a more controlled strategy, one that is clearer and potentially could upend some of these races?
Again, the thing I want people to think about this is if you're trying to get Republicans to vote, it's like those old movies on the battleship where you're turning one big wheel to get a big sluice of water going. With the Democratic Party, it's lots of little wheels to get lots of different sluices. So there are voters, the Never Trump voters, the people who delivered seats like Texas 7 and other seats the Democrats won in 2018, who respond only to the democracy message and to none of the other messages, and their other voters.
All right, we will leave it there with that imagery. Thank you very much. Great conversation, Maria Cornell and David. Appreciate it. And be sure to catch Chuck's entire exclusive one-on-one interview with Vice President Harris this Sunday. That's on Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. A lot more headlines in that. Coming up, Queen Elizabeth's historic 70-year reign comes to an end, and a new era begins in Britain with a new king and a new prime minister. The Queen's legacy and the country's future next. Plus, immediate and serious harm. That's the warning from the Justice Department as it appeals a judge's ruling which halted its access to documents recovered at Mar-a-Lago. What it means for the case and the former president. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us.
It's the best time of the morning. Time for that pop start, baby.
I'm feeling the vibe today on the show.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
Right now on NBC News Now,
we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism? Do you think this could have happened without social media?
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7. Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
Welcome back. As the world continues to mourn the passing of Queen Elizabeth, a new era begins in the United Kingdom with a new monarch for the first time in 7 decades. King Charles III returned to London today, greeted by a crowd who gathered at Buckingham Palace, waiting to see him and to pay their respects. He addressed the nation and the world for the first time as king.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. I, too, now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation.
But the change in the monarchy is not the only leadership change the UK has seen this week. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss began her tenure just 3 days ago. She met with the new king at Buckingham Palace earlier today, as you see there. The country will now enter a 10-day period of national mourning. Gun salutes and church bells could be heard across the country, paying tribute to the only monarch most people in the UK had ever known. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., President Biden has confirmed that he will attend the Queen's funeral. I'm joined now by Matt Bradley, who's on the ground in London, former royal editor for ITV News and an NBC News royal contributor, Tim Ewart, and NBC News presidential historian, Michael Beschloss. Thanks to all of you for being here. Matt, I want to start with you. The news starting to sink in now on this first full day that the UK has a king now, a day after it has lost its queen. What is the mood like there in London?
Well, look, I mean, Kristen, you're not going to walk around and see it in public. You know, Britons aren't crying into their tea or their pints in pubs. It's still, everybody is keeping calm and carrying on, which is a terrible cliche, but it really is the truth here. But there is emotion that is coming out, and you're hearing it in conversations with people. You're hearing it on the radio from people calling in and people who have been interviewed on TV. You know, it's around, and people do really feel it. And one of the things that I've really noticed, and a lot of the testimonies that I've heard from ordinary people, is the extent to which, even though this was a woman who was so impossibly distant, someone who you could not access for an ordinary person, everybody who has been talking about her has a personal anecdote that they want to tell. You know, they want to say and explain how the Queen impacted them personally. And a lot of people have said the same thing. She felt like a member of our own family. So while this woman who lived in a castle, separated from the public, even as she made every effort to try to feel as though she was amongst the people, she was successful in that effort. And the testimonies and the speeches that we've been hearing really just go to show that so many people felt close to her, even though she was so distant and so far away.
It's such an important point, Matt. And of course, throughout her tenure, she met with 13 sitting presidents. They each had personal anecdotes about her. Very briefly, Matt, what can we expect from this 10-day period of national mourning?
Yeah, I mean, this is, just going to be pomp and ceremony. It's going to be going all the way from Scotland and Balmoral all the way down to here in London. And in the next 10 days, you're going to see what the British royal family, the monarchy, does best. And that is kind of papering over this moment of mourning with pomp and circumstance, with symbolism. And that is something that distracts people from their grief, to show that there is continuity, to give tribute to this woman who lived a life of service, to wish their best wishes to the new king, but also to unite together as Britons. And it comes at such a fractious moment. And it's ironic that the loss of the sovereign is something that really has brought a lot of Britons together. Politically, they're facing so many challenges. And of course, as you mentioned, this is an extraordinary changing of the guard. It's not just the head of government, not just the head of state, it is the head of government. Two major figures, the Prime Minister and the Queen, have both left and have both been replaced. It is a new moment, a new era for Britain, and one in which a lot of people here are hoping that they can be united in tragedy.
And Tim, pick up on that point. This is a new moment, a new era. We heard from the new king today for the very first time. What do you make of what we heard from him and this remarkable, extraordinary moment for the UK and the world?
Well, Charles faces a challenge as he takes over the monarchy here. He's succeeding a woman who was incredibly popular in this country, and he starts from a position himself of not being particularly popular. He isn't one of Britain's favourite royals. But I have to say that today he took some big strides towards correcting that. The first thing that was so noticeable was that when he arrived back at Buckingham Palace with Camilla, who's his queen consort, he immediately went to the crowds that were outside the palace. He walked along the line. He shook everybody by the hand. He got some hugs. He even got a kiss. Some people saying, "God save the king," "Bless you, Charles," and all of that. And that showed that he does have a human touch, despite that reluctance to give him the benefit of the doubt on the question of popularity among many people here. he does have a human touch. He is very at ease with the crowds. And then in his speech, I think he was really very moving, on a personal level, very moving. He spoke eloquently about taking on the role of the Queen, of keeping up her promise to serve the nation until the end. And he also, it is worth noting, extended a very public olive branch to Harry and Meghan, very pointedly expressing his love for them. Now, they are not popular at all in this country at the moment, very controversial. That has pained Charles greatly. And I think that was quite a significant moment there. And clearly, he hopes that people will try to forgive what they perceive as the wrongs committed by Harry and Meghan.
And I know that there's also some hope that there will be some reunification between the two brothers there. Michael Beschloss, we always turn to you in these moments, these big moments, to help us process them. And we're so grateful that we have you for that. Help us process what the weight that King Charles now bears and what you are anticipating as he now moves forward as king. He is a very different king than his mother was queen, in the sense that he is someone who has made climate change, for example, one of his big issues. What are you expecting to see from him, and how do you think he will, if he does, keep the monarchy relevant?
Oh, I think that's exactly the way to frame it, Kristen, because, you know, here he is coming in. Is Queen Elizabeth an act that you or I would like to follow? She is not. And even 24 hours after yesterday, we're now appreciating, I think, even more historically, what a piece of work she really was. You know, what a place that she had in the world, how seriously she was taken by presidents and prime ministers. That will be hard for Charles to replicate, especially because it's going to be inevitable that, you know, when he goes down a rope line the same way, wasn't a rope line, but shakes hands with a crowd the way he did today in front of Buckingham Palace, all those people, or most of them, were saying, you know, thank you, nice to shake hands with you, but in their minds they were saying, we wish you were your mother. That will go on for a while. So he's got to not only, as you were saying, you know, find a place in the hearts of the British people that he has not yet had, and that the Queen, against all odds, established, even though coming from an opulent background. The one thing that I think is more hopeful for him is exactly what you're saying, Kristen. You're talking about climate change. He's amazingly well-versed on policy. He has met presidents and prime ministers since he was a child. This is about the most experienced person nearly ever to become a monarch in the United Kingdom, and that should count for a lot. So if he can combine that with emotional intelligence and get the British people to see his heartbeat, I think there's a large possibility that he will be a successful king and preserve the monarchy.
What a brilliant point, just how prepared he is for this moment. He is in his 70s. Michael, I keep thinking about the fact that she was only in her 20s when she became queen.
Right.
And let me just have you and then Tim pick up on this point. This is a change in leadership, not only at the monarchy, but a new prime minister. How potentially challenging is that for the people of Britain as they also deal with an economy in crisis and a range of other issues?
It's almost like planets coming together. You know, when the Queen became the Queen in 1952, January, at the age of 25, she had a little help because guess who the prime minister was? It was Winston Churchill. If you're a young person becoming monarch, I think you'd want Churchill to be there to guide you. But here we have a new king and a new prime minister who came up very far, very fast. So it's something that the British people are not accustomed to. But I think the biggest problem that the king is going to face is there's nothing in Talmudic law that says that Britain has to have a monarchy. It does because the Queen did such a great job for 70 years. Whether it does in the future, whether Britain is relevant in the world, will depend an awful lot, not only on who's prime minister, but how well the king performs.
Well, and you just capture so well how heavy the weight is for Charles. Tim, very quickly, your thoughts on this new chapter with a new monarch and a new prime minister.
Yeah, I think that analysis there from Michael was spot on, actually. I mean, we are a country on the brink of a crisis, if not in a crisis. There are lots of problems here. Divisiveness really is very prevalent now. We're a very divided nation. Angry views are being expressed on both sides. We've got a brand new king, although he's 73 years old, and a new prime minister. They both face huge challenges. I personally think that Charles will rise to the occasion. I think he will win over the public. I think he knows how to do that. And don't forget, he's got William at his side, who's going to take over the reins of arguing some of the cases and championing some of the causes that the king cannot now do. So I think he will do well. Liz Truss, I'm not a political expert at all. She faces challenges that are just as big.
All right. Well, Tim and Michael, thank you so much for helping us to process this historic and very weighty moment. We really appreciate it.
Thank you a lot.
Coming up next, the Justice Department pushes back against a court ruling that's temporarily blocked its access to sensitive documents recovered at Mar-a-Lago, arguing that U.S. national security might be at risk. That reporting and what happens next after a quick break. You're watching Meet the Press now.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
It's the best time of the morning. Time for that pop start, baby.
I'm feeling the vibe today on the show.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Harry Styles!
To cover the news, you have to be in it.
This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
We're here to start conversations, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
Welcome back. Former President Trump's legal team has until Monday to respond to the Justice Department's appeal of a judge's decision to appoint a special master to review documents obtained from Mar-a-Lago. The Justice Department announced its plan to appeal yesterday, arguing that a former president cannot assert executive privilege to prevent the executive branch from reviewing its own records. The DOJ is also asking for a partial stay of the judge's ruling while that appeal is pending, writing, quote, "A stay would simply allow the government to continue to review and use the same records, which, again, indisputably belong to the government, not plaintiff in its ongoing criminal investigation as well." For more on all of this, I'm joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, it is great to see you. Thanks for being here. So break down for you, what are the key takeaways of this appeal? What's the significance here?
So we don't know yet what they're going to argue to the appeals court, but we know what they've asked this judge in the case, and they've asked her to reconsider her order that they're not able to use 100 classified documents that they took out of Mar-a-Lago in their investigation. And they also don't want a special master to look at those documents. They're saying That person can look at 10,000 other documents we took out of there, but not the classified documents, because they say these are not the property of Donald Trump. They are U.S. government records. There's no plausible legal attorney-client privilege claim, and they say they're not subject to executive privilege, and they say the government needs to, because of this judge's order, they have put their damage assessment into the whether sources and methods have been compromised. They put that on hold, and they're saying the government needs to start doing that because national security is at risk. They're saying the public is suffering irreparable harm because of this order, and they're asking the judge to put that part on hold.
And when you say sources and methods can be at risk, for our audience, that means lives could be at risk.
Absolutely. And they're saying, for example, that they found a lot of empty envelopes marked classified, and they need to figure out what was in those envelopes and what happened to that information. And some of these documents were among the most highly classified documents that exist in the United States.
So what are the next steps in the appeal, Ken? And how much could this actually delay the investigation by the Justice Department?
It's a good question. So tonight we are expecting the Justice Department and the Trump side to propose names, possible names for the special master. And then by Monday, the judge has given the Trump side until Monday to file a response to this Justice Department argument. And then we see what they take up to the 11th Circuit, and we wait to see what this judge will do in response to the DOJ's request for the stay.
All right. Ken Delanian, another busy weekend for you.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your being here. And coming up, as congressional campaigns enter the home stretch, lawmakers and candidates are facing growing threats of political violence. I'll talk to Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal as she goes public about her own harrowing experience with an armed suspect at her house. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
These days, it feels like the news never get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months. Exactly. Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Harry Styles!
Our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. The Fed raises interest rates. That controls inflation. Explain how that works. Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs and their relationship to their employers? Can you just remind us why there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court instead of 3 or 20 or 2? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
And what do you love about fatherhood?
The chaos, the learning. Is climate change one of your top priorities?
What's your message to girls who want to make a difference in their own communities?
Believe in yourself.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
Welcome back. Threats of political violence have become a sad, frightening, and unfortunately regular part of our political landscape in the past few years. Yesterday, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal released portions of threatening voicemails she's received, painting a picture of the vitriol leveled against lawmakers and the reality of what she herself has been facing. We do want to warn you, this is disturbing. Take a listen.
You're going to get exactly what you deserve. Have a nice day. Why don't you guys go back to where you came from? None of these are damn citizens. Your day is coming. Damn, as soon as the president's installed, like on November 4th or 5th, we're coming after all you mother. You're going to be scrubbing floors for the rest of your life.
Congresswoman Jayapal published those voicemails following this story in the Washington Post, where she told the harrowing story of how a man stalked her home and harassed her before ultimately showing up at her house with a loaded gun. The man was arrested and prosecuted. Now, in addition to Congresswoman Jayapal, multiple lawmakers, primarily those who have spoken out against the former president, have reported receiving harassment and threats against them and their families. Democratic Congresswoman from Washington, Pramila Jayapal, joins me now to talk about all of this. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here to discuss this. We really appreciate it.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
And I am sorry that you have gone through all of that. We want to say that at the top. Tell us, why did you decide to reveal these threats? Why was it important for you to release those tapes for the public to hear what you had received on your voicemail?
Well, Kristen, it was in the context of the story that the Washington Post did about what happened to me. And again, what I felt is important is for people to understand the level of the violence, political rhetoric, racism and sexism that is underlying much of it, that at least comes towards me and others, particularly women of color that I know of, and to understand that these are not isolated incidents, that there's a direct line between the big lie, January 6th and the insurrection, and then what we are all experiencing, even in our homes at an individual level, and then what the impact is for our society and what is at stake. Because I think that is the most important thing for people to understand what has been unleashed and how important it is that we work quickly to try to restore ourselves to a society that can disagree about policy without threatening political violence, without attempting to steal elections, without having an insurrection on the Capitol. And so in the course of that story, the Washington Post reporter, who was really excellent, Ruby Kramer, asked me about other threats I've received, and I shared with her a whole series of voicemails, and we just released a few of them. This is normalized behavior that should not be normalized, and I think that's what's important for people to know.
And Congresswoman, you talk about January 6th, you, as you say, were there at the Capitol as the rioters stormed inside. And you have asked for more security in the wake of that. Can you update everyone? Where does that stand? Do you feel like you have the protection you need in order to do your job effectively?
Well, I'm not going to speak about my personal arrangements for obvious reasons, but I will say that I think what came to light to me is how much we do need to do as a Congress to assure member safety. And so I did take it upon myself to write a private letter. I don't want the details of that disclosed, again, for obvious reasons, to our leadership and to the Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms to help protect all members. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us being able to do our jobs. And I know from talking to members that this is a concern. And in fact, I've been responding to numerous texts ever since this happened, ever since I've spoken about this on a caucus call and put forward my very specific recommendations to members. I'm getting calls from members about very specific aspects of personal security as members attempt to update their own homes. And that's not really how it should work. And so I think I am really focused on trying to make sure that all of our caucus, all of our members, really all electeds, whatever party you're from, are protected. And some of it is security. and protection. Some of it is prevention and really making clear what the lines of communication are in the event of a serious threat.
Congresswoman, you talk about the fact that from your perspective, you think that women of color are disproportionately targeted. One of your colleagues, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, gave an interview to GQ magazine this week. I want to read you what she said and then get your reaction on the other side. She said, "I hold two contradictory things in my mind at the same time. One is just the relentless belief that anything is possible. But at the same time, my experience here has given me a front row seat to how deeply and unconsciously, as well as consciously, so many people in this country hate women, and they hate women of color. Realistically, I can't even tell you if I'm going to be alive in September." Congresswoman Jayapal, that is devastating to read. Can you react to it? Do you feel the same way?
Yes, I think that many of us feel the same way, and we've talked about it as women of color. If you listen to those voicemails, you will hear the difference. Not only do we get death threats and people, a man with a gun at my door, but also you get the racism and the sexism that underlies and propels a lot of the violence. The words that are used, the vitriol with which they are used, the sexism, xenophobia, and racism that is threaded through every single message that we receive is disgusting. It is not normal. It should not be allowed. It should not be encouraged, which is, of course, what the last president did.
Congresswoman,
and I think it's really important for people to understand that.
And before we run out of time, I do want to ask you about some of the rhetoric that we have heard from people in your own party right now against the backdrop of what is really an intensified, I think, political climate. The president's been criticized for referring to MAGA Republicans, as you know, as semi-fascists. Vice President Harris just told Chuck today that she believes that we have a quote-unquote activist court. And my question to you is about rhetoric broadly. Do you worry that that type of rhetoric, when you're talking about the president, the vice president, from some of our top officials, just kind of gins up controversy in what's an already volatile environment?
Kristen, I don't think they're equivalents. I don't think that calling insurrectionists semi-fascists is wrong. I really think that the president did a very important thing, which is to call out the seriousness of what the country is facing. And I think that is very different than people showing up at the Capitol to launch a violent insurrection and steal an election, or people showing up with guns at our doors. And I think that's true no matter what side of the party you're talking about. But I think we have to be careful about being so cautious to not call out what we see happening. And in fact, by doing that, allow it to happen. So I thank the president for his speech. I think it was a very important speech to come from the White House. And I think we have to be real about what we're confronting. Liz Cheney is being real. I think Democrats should be real.
All right. Congresswoman Jayapal, we really appreciate your joining us to discuss this really important topic, and we wish you safety ahead of November and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Still to come, rising seas, rising costs. A new report details just how dire the climate crisis could soon get as officials battle a record-breaking heat wave out west. You're watching Meet the Press Now. We're back after a quick break. Stay with us.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Right now on NBC News Now, we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism?
Do you think this could have happened without social media?
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Welcome back. Relief is finally in sight for millions of Americans out west who have been dealing with an historic heat wave. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees this week, but it is now expected to cool off significantly this weekend. That is both a reprieve for people and for the California power grid, which was pushed to the limit with record-breaking temperatures. The state's grid operator extended its call for voluntary electricity conservation for this evening in an effort to prevent rolling blackouts. It's the latest evidence of the burden prolonged heat waves driven by a changing climate has put on our infrastructure. To get a sense of how some communities are trying to respond to this climate crisis, Chuck met with Phoenix's chief heat mitigation officer while he was in Phoenix this week, and he got an on-the-ground look at how the city is preparing for a hotter future.
So we called it the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation very intentionally. Two parts, two different missions. One is to protect people when it's hot. We've had more than 300 people die from heat exposure here in Maricopa County each of the last 2 years. That's a big problem. The biggest risk is certainly with our unsheltered communities. So that's what we've really been trying to amplify our efforts on, communicating where public cooling resources are, getting supplies in people's hands, but also trying to get people connected to social services like shelter and housing, food stamps, ID, income. Those are the big wins that I think can improve our heat resilience over the long term.
When we talk about people that sometimes have to sleep in the streets, these streets are not safe, physically not safe. You were showing me some temperatures here.
Yeah, streets can easily exceed 160, 170 degrees Fahrenheit to the touch on a hot summer day like today, and that poses a burn risk for human skin, for puppy paws, for any cats that are out there. Streets are very hot.
There's two different colors here of the road that makes it easier for us to see. The lighter colored is this new technology, a cooler asphalt, I guess, or a cooler top.
We call it cool pavement here in Phoenix. It's a coating that goes on top of the traditional asphalt.
This is more traditional asphalt that we're staring at here,
right here.
What somebody might do in their own driveway or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. This is what we use on thousands and thousands of miles of streets here in Phoenix. This other coating is only on about 80 miles right now. This is a more reflective coating that's designed to prevent the sunlight from getting into the asphalt column itself, where asphalt is really good at grabbing heat, holding onto it, and slowly re-releasing it at night. If we can keep it out of the system, we can help make the city a little cooler. We've got 156 Fahrenheit. We move over a little bit. I saw 158, 157.
All right.
So it is a very hot surface.
This is a well-done piece of meat.
We're now on the cool pavement coating, but we'll just pick a random location here, and 151.
Let's go ahead and relitigate the last 50 years. If there's one thing you could have changed, what would it have been in the development of Phoenix?
We just don't have a lot of place to plant trees. Just in this neighborhood, I suspect any of the places that we see vegetation are not really at our disposal as a city to do planting. This is all private. We don't have public right-of-way in the middle. We'd have to be working with homeowners here. It doesn't mean we can't do it, but it makes it a little bit more complicated. And we got to get water to those places as well.
Now, granted, this is money that local residents, I think, probably buy into it to a point. But how much have you run into any barriers, any financial barriers?
We're only 10 months into having this office, and the timing has been really good. The city just received its second allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funding, a bonus pot of money, and we're able to put some of that to work for heat mitigation. When that runs out 2-3 years down the road, when we're having a conversation about the general fund. Right now, great support from mayor, great support from city council, and great support from the public. So let's keep that momentum going. We know there's a lot of community support. Tough conversations absolutely ahead of us, but we're optimistic right now. People are investing in Phoenix and in the Sun Belt like they never have before. That development brings the risk of additional warming. We clearly don't have everything figured out here yet in Phoenix. People are getting sick and dying from heat at too high a rate. People in neighborhoods like this one ask and are concerned about their neighborhood being hotter than others. So we are still on our learning journey, but we are the hottest large city in the United States. I think we have a couple of strategies that are showing some promise. So we're really happy to be able to have that conversation with other cities and learn what they're doing. We don't have a lot of time for everybody to be improvising solutions on their own.
Great interview by Chuck, and look at that new technology there in Phoenix. All right, that does it for us this hour. We will be back on Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And as we mentioned, you do not want to miss Chuck's exclusive interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. That's this Sunday on Meet the Press. Their one-on-one conversation included threats to democracy, the future of the filibuster, prosecuting the former president, and so much more. A lot of headlines, folks. You do not want to miss it. That's this Sunday on your local NBC News station. NBC News Now coverage continues with Gabe Gutierrez, who's in for Hallie Jackson right now.
We're coming on the air with a message from King Charles III to a skeptical United Kingdom as he joins the nation in mourning his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. His moving tribute as he lays out a plan for what he believes comes next, not just for the UK, but for his family. Part of that plan, giving Diana's title, the Princess of Wales, to William's wife, Kate. Plus, Tropical Storm Kay making landfall near California, bringing 60-mile-per-hour winds. How those gusts are giving new power to those dangerous wildfires across the state. And in tonight's original, we speak exclusively to the woman who oversees Homeland Security's fight against cyber attacks, what she's saying about these new threats to schools. Plus, a new warning about artificial sweeteners. One of the world's oldest medical journals now says they should not be considered a healthy and safe alternative to sugar. Our doctor's here to answer your questions. And Maryland's Francis Tiafoe looks to become the first American man to reach the finals of the U.S. Open in more than 15 years. A look ahead to his primetime matchup later in the show. Hey, I'm Gabe Gutierrez, in for Hallie. As the United Kingdom grieves the death of Queen Elizabeth II, her son, King Charles III, is making his pitch to a grieving public that he plans to keep calm and carry on his mother's legacy. In an 8-minute televised address broadcast across the world, Charles gave a heartfelt tribute to his mother, the woman who acted as a moral center for the UK for 70 years. His message summed up with gratitude.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years.
Country joining the king in mourning his mother at a prayer service in London's St. Paul's Cathedral. Among the speakers, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who spoke with Charles today. Across the UK, stores are shut down and soccer matches suspended through the weekend as thousands gather at the royal residences to lay flowers and pay their respects. Not just here, but around the world, from Washington to Tokyo and Moscow. And as he mourns his mother, Charles is also using today to plot what comes next, starting with the future of his own family. Charles is bestowing new titles on his son and the heir to the throne, William, who will now be the Duke of Cornwall and Prince of Wales, both titles held by his father for 50 years. He did not bestow any new titles on his other son, Harry, instead choosing to wish he and his American wife, Meghan, well on their lives overseas. Charles also did not mention William and Harry's late mother, Diana, whose title, Princess of Wales, now goes to William's wife, Kate. But he did take a moment to speak about his second wife, Camilla, now the Queen Consort.
I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much.
Brings us to our third takeaway, his mission forward, as Charles looks to balance what he calls Britain's tradition and values with the model his mother set forth, in his words, the fearless embrace of progress. Why? Because this is a nation that is deeply skeptical of his ability to rule. The latest YouGov polling shows 2/3 of Britons either think Charles will not be a good king or they're just ambivalent about his rule. Charles channeling his mother's pledge to the nation more than 70 years ago.
Wherever you may live in the United Kingdom or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life.
Tim Ewart will give us analysis in just a second, but first we want to begin with Matt Bradley, who's in London. And Matt, in many ways, King Charles was trying to maintain that stability after his mother's passing while also looking forward. So walk us through your takeaways from that speech.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I got to tell you, Gabe, I was actually surprised by sort of the amount of officialdom that we heard from the new king just today, describing those titles, his role with the charities and the foundations that he's been so active with, and how he's going to have to kind of be stepping back from some of those duties. We've already heard the king had said previously that his positions on certain political issues was relatively strong when you think about the fact that he's a royal who has no constitutional role. Normally they're not supposed to truly express their opinions, and his mother really almost never did. He has already mentioned that he's not going to be continuing to express his views, most notably on the environment and other ecological causes, which he's been somewhat outspoken on, really kind of ahead of his time on. He was quite prescient in coming out on some of those issues. So what we're hearing from this speech today, it's not something that's going to rock the boat. It wasn't so unexpected. It was interesting that he mentioned Harry and Meghan and wished them luck, considering how much scandal they've been heaping on the royal family. But look, you mentioned how he's not necessarily a popular ruler. The fact is, a lot of Britons rank him, and in terms of their preference among the royal family, rank him below some of the children who are in the royal family in terms of who they prefer. He's not a favorite. He's not necessarily a charismatic person or a charismatic politician, but he inherits a lofty title, an incredible legacy after the death of his mother, and it's one that he looks like he's determined to rise to that challenge, and that's what he was setting forth in this speech today.
Picking up on that point, you know, that YouGov poll that you mentioned is showing just 34% of Britons who wanted to be king. 37% actually want his son William, and another third either don't care or want no one. So, you know, tell me a little bit more. What's the reaction been among anybody you've been speaking with there in London or across Britain with reaction to this speech when you look at those poll numbers there?
Well, look, I got to tell you, in all honesty, I haven't gotten much reaction from the speech because I've been standing right here the whole time. But I can tell you that we saw earlier today, before that speech, which was pre-recorded, we saw the enormous outpouring of good wishes for the new king as he arrived at Buckingham Palace, his new home. You know, we saw that woman reach out and kiss him on the cheek. We can't deny that this is a man who was not so well loved before. We got to remember that this is a man who spent more time waiting to ascend to the throne than any other monarch in British history. So, as you know, his mother was the longest reigning monarch. He was the longest waiting monarch. His life has been waiting. It has already been sullied by repeated scandals, including the memory of Princess Diana, who was so loved here, and this feeling among a lot of Britons that it was him, his mother, his family, who wronged Princess Diana in the end. And that's something that he's going to have to get past. But the fact is that his wife, now the Queen Consort, she's kind of been welcomed. You know, it's hard to say exactly how this is going to go because he's cloaked in such power, such history. That will probably help him along. The British people will accept him.
Yeah, and Matt, as you mentioned, waiting so long for that job. Briefly, before I let you go, what comes next in this highly choreographed series of steps after Queen Elizabeth's death?
Yeah, as you mentioned, highly choreographed, a lot of pomp in the next coming days, really more than a week. What we're going to see tomorrow is something really interesting. The king goes to the Accession Council, which is made up mostly of members of his Privy Council, along with some other officials. They will officially proclaim him king, which is interesting, of course, since he has been king since the moment his mother died. But this is going to be televised for the first time. This is another legacy of his mother that he's inheriting, a royal family that tries to reach out to the people. This looks like their own edition. Remember, it was the Queen whose coronation was first televised, the first ever. So this meeting with the Accession Council, that's going to be an interesting new wrinkle, a new look into the royal lives.
Matt Bradley, live for us in London. Matt, thank you. Now, let's go to Tim Ewart. He's a royal commentator, and to bring us a little bit more analysis here. And let's talk a little bit about King Charles giving the title of Princess of Wales to William's wife, Kate, a title most commonly associated, of course, with his late wife, Diana. A royal source tells NBC News, quote, "The new Princess of Wales appreciates the history associated with this role, but will understandably want to look to the future as she creates her own path." So is there some sensitivity here in turning over that title, especially as we saw him make a concerted effort to legitimize Camilla as Queen Consort?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Kate is very, very concerned about being constantly compared to Diana. This started, obviously, when she first appeared on the scene. It was another fairy tale romance. Would this one last? Parallels were drawn between Charles and Diana. So she is very anxious that this doesn't give us, the media, another excuse to go back and draw comparisons. How does this Princess of Wales shape up against the previous Princess of Wales, and so forth? But the bestowing of these titles on William and Kate was inevitably going to happen. He is the heir to the throne. He will be the Prince of Wales. His sons will carry, and his daughter will carry the titles Prince and Princesses of Wales as well. The important thing to remember with William is, and you've talked about a skeptical nation and Charles's lack of popularity. William and Kate are very popular at the moment. They've been helped by the unpopularity and the increasing unpopularity in this country of Harry and Meghan. So people have turned to William and Kate. Charles made it clear today that while he has to keep quiet now as the monarch on some of the issues on which he's been outspoken in the past, he will look to William to carry on that work for him. So William will be, if you like, the public face of a campaigning monarchy, a modernizing monarchy. Issues like the environment, issues like homelessness and poverty and the disadvantaged, all these things are close to King Charles's heart, and that's the role that William is going to take on.
And Tim, you brought up the unpopularity of Harry and Meghan, so let's zero in on that moment in the speech where he made sure to bring up Harry and Meghan very briefly. How much did you read into that?
Well, we know that Charles has been pained by the rift that's come to hit the family. I mean, there's no secret about that. William and Harry are at loggerheads. The Queen herself had always said that the family still loved Harry, still wanted him to be part of the family. So this was a very public olive branch to the couple. I think it was also intended to say to the public, hey, listen, just calm down, just give them a break, stop. And the social media that we have here against Harry and Meghan can be quite bewildering. So I think the part of this was an appeal to us, the public, to lay off, if you like. But it was interesting that he did make a reference to their continued life overseas, which did seem to draw a line under the possibility of them coming back to Britain and resuming any active role with the royal family here.
Tim Ewart, thanks so much for your analysis. We appreciate it. Now, President Biden today confirming to reporters that he will attend the Queen's funeral in the coming weeks. He's the last of 13 U.S. presidents the Queen met during her time on the throne. But today he was in battleground Ohio on a victory lap for his computer chips law less than 2 months before the November midterms. That law boosting domestic production of computer chips to help the U.S. stay competitive with China. But the tight Senate race in Ohio is also top of mind. Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan is facing Trump-backed J.D. Vance, and right now, Cook Political Report rates that race is leaning in Vance's favor. So why is this so important? Well, the winner of that seat could help determine the balance of power in the Senate. Joining me now is Monica Alba. And Monica, we'll begin with the White House's reaction to the Queen's death. How is the White House preparing for the president to attend the funeral? What's the protocol here?
Yeah, there are actually very lengthy protocols here, Gabe. As you can imagine, there will be a formal invitation, we understand, from the royal family to multiple heads of state who would attend the funeral. And then the White House will accept that and announce the travel. And all of that could come in the next couple of days. But today, the president did confirm he intends to go. He doesn't know all the details or how long his visit will be, but he does want to go in person to pay his respects. We saw him last night at the British Embassy with the First Lady, laying flowers, signing a guest book, expressing his condolences, and calling Her Majesty so much more than a monarch. He said that she really defined an era. So we can expect to hear the president talk about that in the lead up to this trip, where we will see many world leaders who actually were supposed to be gathering in New York for the United Nations General Assembly around those dates. So they'll be juggling a lot of travel plans. There's going to be a lot of figuring out what flight leaves London at the right time to get to New York next week. So that's something we'll be watching for, of course, Gabe.
And Monica, the president has been out on the trail this month, first Pennsylvania, and today he took that victory lap on the computer chips law, focusing on manufacturing and infrastructure. Now, Ohio, always an important state, of course, but why more so now?
A battleground, of course, and one that really can be quite indicative of how things are going to be going in a general election. It's, of course, a place that candidates barnstorm all the time, but we're talking about the midterms here. And what's important to remember is that former President Trump did win Ohio in 2016 and in 2020, but today Joe Biden was there as president campaigning on this important manufacturing legislation, but also talking about Congressman Tim Ryan, who is running as a Democratic Senate candidate in Ohio, which, as you showed, is critical for potential control of the U.S. Senate. Here's a little more, though, of what President Biden said today just outside Columbus.
Folks, the future of the chip industry is going to be made in America. Made in America. Folks at home should know the manufacture of these semiconductors connects countless small businesses and manufacturers into a supply chain that's going to thrive, all because of this law.
So this was groundbreaking for an Intel facility. That's why the president was there, but you can't ignore the political backdrop. And when asked if Joe Biden should run again in 2024, Congressman Ryan said it's up to him. He hasn't said definitively whether he should. That's something to watch for, too, here, Gabe.
Monica Alba, live for us at the White House. Monica, thanks so much. And as Vice President Harris today going on the attack against the Supreme Court. In an exclusive interview with NBC's Chuck Todd, the vice president says that as someone who has been inspired by people like Thurgood Marshall and the work leading to Brown v. Board of Education, she is concerned about the court's integrity after it overturned Roe v. Wade.
How much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court?
I think this is an activist court.
What does that mean?
It means that we had an established right for almost half a century, which is the right of women to make decisions about their own body as an extension of what we have decided to be the privacy rights to which all people are entitled. And this court took that constitutional right away. And we are suffering as a nation because of it. That causes me great concern about the integrity of the court overall.
And you can catch more of Chuck's interview with Vice President Harris this Sunday on Meet the Press. The Justice Department and former President Trump's legal team has until midnight tonight to release a list of potential people who could be the special master that would look into the more than 11,000 documents taken from Mar-a-Lago. It comes as the DOJ has decided to appeal the judge's ruling for a special master. That judge is also giving former President Trump's team until Monday morning to respond to a second DOJ filing that asked the judge to revisit the part of her decision that temporarily blocks prosecutors from accessing about 100 classified documents taken from Mar-a-Lago. The DOJ says it prevents the government from determining whether U.S. national security had been compromised. Writing in the filing, quote, "Those aspects of the order will cause the most immediate and serious harms to the government and the public." Joining me now is Ken Delanian. And Ken, let's break down the DOJ's reasonings for both of these filings. First, what would the benefits be for the DOJ in appealing the special master's decision?
Well, Gabe, the DOJ wholeheartedly disagrees with almost all of the judge's order, does not think a special master here is warranted whatsoever. But what they've done here is really interesting. They've really sort of made a targeted approach here to this judge in asking her to stay her own order. They're saying, look, among these 11,000 documents that we took at Mar-a-Lago, we're fine with a special master reviewing 10,900 of them. It's just the 100 classified documents that we don't think it's appropriate for a special master to review, and they make some really almost unassailable, according to legal experts, arguments about this. First of all, they say, look, these are manifestly the U.S. government's documents. They are not Donald Trump's documents. They have classification markings on them. They came from the CIA and other agencies. Secondly, there's no possible attorney-client privilege here. And lastly, they say, even if Donald Trump wanted to assert some executive privilege over some of these documents, which is hard to imagine what that could be, they say the government's interest in national security and a criminal investigation should overcome that privilege. And they say the public is suffering irreparable harm from this judge's order that they are not allowed to use these documents in the criminal investigation. They say that a damage assessment conducted by the intelligence community into, whether any sources and methods have been compromised by the mishandling of these classified documents, that's on hold because of the judge's order, because the DOJ says the FBI criminal investigation is sort of inextricably linked to the overall IC damage assessment. For example, they found all these empty envelopes marked with highly classified markings on them. The FBI, the DOJ says, needs to investigate to figure out what happened to those documents and whether national security was compromised by their mishandling. So that's the argument. We'll wait to see whether the judge agrees with it and stays her own ruling. If she doesn't, then the DOJ is going to ask the appeals court to do that, but that could take a little more time, Gabe.
So, Ken, what do you think are the chances that the DOJ gets what it wants here in these filings?
Well, legal experts I've spoken to think that the DOJ has a very strong hand here, because when the executive branch goes into court and says there's a national security concern, generally the courts defer to the executive branch because the courts don't have that expertise. That expertise lies with the national security agencies of the executive branch. So generally they win that. So with respect to these 100 classified documents, it's very easy to see a way that if the judge doesn't do it, the appeals court will do it rather quickly. And what else this tells us, Gabe, is that the Justice Department does not seem that concerned with the other documents that they seized from Donald Trump's office. The Trump side said there were tax records, health records, other kinds of things. It suggests there aren't any smoking guns in there that the DOJ feels compelled to use in their investigation. They're most concerned with these classified documents, Gabe.
Ken Delanian in Washington. Ken, thanks so much. And with the war in Ukraine far from over, call it a kind of new normal. Now, people in parts of the country away from the fighting are trying to move on with their lives. Plus, metaverse, janky, and yeet. You haven't seen those words in the dictionary before, but you will now. The other words Merriam-Webster is adding coming up.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
They're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top story with Tom Yamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Right now on NBC News Now.
As we come on the air, here's what we know.
It has been dramatic, powerful.
We begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
We're getting out of this area right now because more air raid sirens are sounding.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Was there a school officer on campus? Because that's what we've been told.
No. Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
And the House has answered the call to create new gun laws.
The stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing on Capitol Hill.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
A terrifying night of flash floods.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate. When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge for primary purposes.
It's an interesting race here. I've just never covered anything like it. This is big. When we're talking about November, how many doors do you think you've each knocked on?
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground on this issue?
What do you think when you see the activism that's happening right now? Do you think this movement could have happened without social media?
A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage.
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
And what do you love about fatherhood?
The chaos, the learning. Is climate change one of your top priorities?
What's your message to girls who want to make a difference in their own communities?
Believe in yourself.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Turning now to the weather and a 1-2 punch. We've been hearing about the West Coast battling extreme heat for a while, and now Tropical Storm K is finally here. Check out this new video we're getting. This is Imperial County, and you can see some streets there are already flooded. And we're also seeing this video from another part of California, just north of San Diego. You can see downed trees as they also deal with rain, fog, and wind there. In San Diego, we're talking winds of 45 miles an hour, and it could reach 80 miles an hour in some areas in the mountains. Of course, temperatures on the West Coast are already high, and these high temperatures plus intense winds are now fueling wildfires. Millions of people from Northern California up through Washington State are under red flag warnings or an increased risk of fire danger. Steve Patterson joins me now from the West Coast. And Steve, we're seeing these intense winds from the tropical storm. So how much are those winds contributing to the wildfires being made so much worse over there?
You know, Gabe, I think too often we see a lot of these fires. Maybe you're viewing it on TV, you see the flames, you point and say, that's the primary antagonist, that's what's burning structures. But it often, rarely, especially when you have fires this large burning across California like this, rarely is that the primary culprit. The wind truly is what is driving these fires, and this tropical wind only going to make it worse. When you're talking about 40 to 80 mile an hour winds coming over canyons into these fire zones, that means that aircraft can't fly. Remember, it only takes about 30 mile an hour winds or so to ground aircraft for that retardant that they drop that is so crucial on the front lines of so many of these to be wholly ineffective. That's the fear at this Fairview fire, now a monster fire in Riverside County, as well as the flash flood warnings that this brings. Inside these fire zones, you're dealing with a dual threat, a triple threat if you add the fact that there are burn scars all over the state, the torrential rain that comes increases the risk for mudslides. You're dealing with multiple emergencies on multiple fronts. The good news is the rain is expected to really end the heat wave kind of all in one stroke. And some of these fire zones are going to get rain from this tropical storm. That will certainly make a difference, but it will do more harm than good, especially with the wind that is expected to come over.
Yeah, so the rain is good, the wind is not. Governor Newsom there has declared a state of emergency for some of the places threatened by, as you mentioned, the Fairview fire, but there's also the Mosquito fire, and that one's over 15,000 acres as well. So as these communities are getting this weather over the next couple of days, how prepared are they, though, for all that's to come?
Yeah, the Fairview fire started a little under, 2,000 acres or so a few days ago. Firefighters told us at worst, and this was to be somewhat of a disaster scenario, that it would get up to 7,000 acres. That fire is now 27,000 acres plus. It is burning on multiple fronts. It is burning exponentially every day this week. It grew another 4,000 acres since last night. Getting a handle on it has been so incredibly difficult, and we've said it, this tropical storm only set to make things worse. Firefighters are really doing all they can. They're alerting people about what's happening, but the problem is when you have winds that are this erratic, these eastwardly winds kind of swirling the fires. We've seen several fire tornadoes pop up in that area as well. It's very difficult to tell, and the spotting from the fires, in other words, where the embers jump from scene to scene, creating new spot fires, pushing the front of the fire to a different zone, it's very, very difficult, and it's only going to get worse unless, again, we get a significant amount of rain to really knock this out, but that's not expected. Gabe?
Steve Patterson in L.A. for us. Steve, thanks so much. And I want to bring in Bill Cairns now. Bill, let's start on the high temperatures because today's the last day of that historic western heat wave, right?
Oh, yeah, we're right in the middle of it. San Diego's cooled off. A couple other spots have cooled off. But, yes, today's the really big blockbuster day that will set record highs. The all-time September highs or even all-time highs like Sacramento and San Jose did earlier this week. But look at downtown L.A. I mean, it's 98 degrees right now, and this is the difference for when you have the tropical moisture over you and some rain showers. It's 78 in San Diego, but we're still very hot in Sacramento. Look at Red Bluff, about the hottest anywhere in the West right now, 108 degrees. And yesterday we were 99 in Denver. Mother Nature turned the AC on today at 61. So what are we going to expect? So we still have roughly about 28 million people under the heat warnings. These all expire later on this evening in the West Coast. And then as we go throughout, the day today, we're going to top out 110, 107, 106. But tomorrow into the weekend, we take the temperatures down. Not quite back to average, but at least close to it. Highs will be in the 90s instead. So that's a little bit better. And as far as that tropical storm goes, Kay is still spreading rain, mostly in Southern California. Some of that's trying to move up towards L.A. We'll get most of that heavy rain, though, in the mountains. And that's where we already have these flash flood warnings. Flash flood watches go all the way up to Las Vegas with this storm system because this will stick around for 2 or 3 days, Gabe.
And, Bill, we're also seeing flood watches for the southeast, too. How's that looking into the weekend?
Yeah, this isn't tropical related. Typically this time of year we'd be tracking something tropical related. This is actually just a regular old storm that's located near New Orleans. You can see on the radar, anywhere there's yellow, there's downpour. So all over the place. We're mostly concerned with the low-lying areas from Savannah all the way up to Charleston. And then right near Tallahassee, called this the Big Bend area of Florida. That's where we're expecting the highest rainfall totals. Widespread 1 to 3. Isolated could get up to 10 inches of rain. So if that happens, we will get some flash flooding out of this. But we'll see how it develops as we go throughout the weekend. Highest totals, again, Savannah to Charleston, that 3 inches, and then near that Big Bend, Gabe.
And, Bill, before I let you go, let's talk about that new research showing that rising sea levels are actually encroaching on private property in places like Louisiana. What's your takeaway from what we're seeing in this report?
Yeah, this was an interesting study. Typically, you hear in the news, a new study came out saying how high the sea levels are going to rise as we go throughout the next, say, 50 years, 100 years. Well, what's interesting in this study is they actually said, okay, the sea level is going to rise so far, and as it rises, people are going to lose property. And if people lose property, they will want to pay less taxes because the ocean is going to be up higher. So this actually went and calculated, they looked at all the people's property lines, where the ocean hits the beach, and different states have different criteria for where that line is. I don't know this. I don't own property at the beach. So this was a brand new information study to me. And they actually went county by county in all the states and show which properties in which states are going to lose the most money. And Florida was #1 with 140,000 properties that are on the beaches that'll have to be reassessed, and areas like Louisiana had over 100,000. So this was just a different angle, Gabe, on what is going to happen. There'll be a lot less tax revenue.
Wow, a lot to chew on there, Bill. Thanks so much. Now let's get over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Clark County official Robert Tellis has been arrested after his DNA was found at the murder scene of a prominent Las Vegas investigative journalist. Jeff German was found stabbed to death outside his home on Saturday. Detectives say the politician accused of murder publicly expressed his anger at German and his reporting. Number 2, Los Angeles health officials are investigating the death of a person who had monkeypox. It's the second known death in the U.S. Someone who had monkeypox also died in Texas. Monkeypox is rarely fatal, but people with weak immune systems are at higher risk of severe disease. Number 3, BYU dropping a ban on a fan who had allegedly used racial slurs at a match against Duke University. BYU says it reached out to more than 50 eyewitnesses and did an extensive review of video and audio from the match, but they did not find any evidence that the fan used racial slurs. Duke responded to the statement saying it stands by its players and does not tolerate hate or bias. Number 4, baseball will have a new set of rules for 2023. Some of those rules include a pitch clock, meaning the pitcher has 15 seconds to throw the ball when no one's on base and 20 seconds when someone is on base. Also, bigger bases and a shift ban. Votes on the new rules were not unanimous. Some players opposed a pitch clock and shift ban, but were overruled by the league. Number 5, you will soon find pumpkin spice and yeet in your dictionaries after Merriam-Webster added 370 new words and phrases. Also new to the dictionary, metaverse, janky, and sus. Learn something new every day. That's a little sus, that story is anyway. A health warning, raising new alarms now about the alternatives to sugar that many of us have every day. What do you need to know about the new study on artificial sweeteners and whether there's a better option out there? Stay with us.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
NBC News, streaming free now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
Our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. The Fed raises interest rates. That controls inflation. Explain how that works. Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs and their relationship to their employers? Could you just remind us why there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court instead of 3 or 20 or 2? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations? Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
We turn now overseas, where Ukrainian forces have regained ground in the Kharkiv region. President Zelensky says that troops have liberated nearly 400 square miles after more than 6 months of Russian occupation. Also, United Nations monitors say a safe zone around the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant needs to be established immediately to prevent a nuclear accident. The plant, which first came under Russian attack in March, has repeatedly been hit by shelling. Ukrainian engineers at the plant are using a precarious stopgap measure, relying on one active reactor to run the nation's critical safety and cooling systems. And as the war grinds on, Ukrainians are trying to forge a new normal, saying they simply can't hide in bunkers forever. NBC's Josh Letterman has their story.
Black clouds separated. Saturday in Kyiv, and for a few hours, music blaring, alcohol flowing, people dancing, you could almost forget there's a war.
Before the war, the nightclub didn't even open until 11 o'clock, but there is martial law right now and a military-imposed curfew, and so now Ukrainians are partying in the middle of the day.
Garrick Pledov has been DJing for hours in the daytime, packing in the fun long before the 11 p.m. curfew shuts the city down.
Inside of these people are like big hole, and after this they feel again their lives.
It's a far different scene in Ukraine's east and south, where fierce fighting has erased nearly every sign of normal life. Across Ukraine, some 12 million people have fled their homes, and nearly 14,000 civilians have been killed so far, according to the United Nations. But in parts of Ukraine where the Russians retreated months ago, nightlife, tourism, and bits of normalcy are starting to come back. Like COVID. Easy to overlook in a war zone, but not at this vaccination site. This man getting a booster says during war, people forget there's still a virus spreading, so better to be safe. At a Georgian restaurant near Maidan Square, entertainment was canceled when the war started. Tonight, for the first time, it's back.
They want to eat and have some performance, not just to read bad news. They want something bright.
In most of Ukraine, air raid sirens still go off almost daily. By now, most people ignore them and go about their day. This year, the IMF says Ukraine's economy is expected to shrink by more than a third. But the government says it's starting to stabilize and could expand by 15% by next year. Most tourists are still staying away. At Odessa's beachside Hotel Nemo, 80% of rooms are empty.
Economically, it's totally a disaster time for us. It's more political now. We want to show how we stay strong.
The sun is out and the pools are open. But before the war, the party would have been right here on the beach. These days, landmines make the beach off limits.
Alexander Cohen and his wife Hannah have started bringing their baby once a week to this pool just next door to the Odessa port, which was recently struck by Russian missiles.
After a while, you kind of realize that you really have no control over anything. You think that you're safe in the bomb shelter, but you know, how safe is it? After a while, you realize that there's just no way for you to take all the risk out of life, and I think everyone just adjusts. Can't be scared all your life because you're just not living anymore.
One more sign that parts of normal life are coming back in Ukraine. McDonald's, which is hugely popular here, closed all its restaurants at the start of the war. Now, the company says it will start reopening some of its locations, beginning in western Ukraine and here in Kyiv. Back to you.
Josh Letterman, thank you. Now, coming up, a Hallie Jackson Now exclusive interview with the top government official in the fight against cybercrime. Why students' information has become so vulnerable to cyber attacks and what school administrators are doing to make sure the data stays safe. Plus, honoring the life of a Memphis woman who was abducted a week ago today during an early morning run. How thousands of people showed up to remember Eliza Fletcher and take a stand against violence toward women. Stay with us.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back. We're hearing more warnings about how artificial sweeteners can be harmful to your health. A new study is additional evidence linking aspartame and sucralose to increased risk of stroke, high blood sugar, and heart disease. The report, published in one of the world's oldest medical journals, states artificial sweeteners, quote, should not be considered a healthy and safe alternative to sugar. And they're harmful in small doses. Just 77 milligrams of aspartame, or 2 packets a day, can cause elevated risk of stroke. And as I mentioned, this stuff is everywhere. Aspartame is found in sweeteners like Equal and NutraSweet, also in cereals, yogurt, candy, and diet soda. Sucralose found in Splenda, baked goods, ice cream, canned fruit, flavored yogurt, and syrups. So we want to bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. And doctor, we've been hearing for years that artificial sweeteners are bad for us. So what are the alternatives? And what's the answers? Is anything okay?
Well, you know, what's interesting about this, Gabe, is that I think people who are sort of purists would hear that and say, see, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And, you know, I kind of agree with that in some ways, but the answer isn't necessarily, well, I'm just going to go back to regular sugar, because sugar, as we know, causes a lot of problems too. Insulin resistance and diabetes, which leads to heart disease and everything like that. In fact, according to the American Heart Association, women are supposed to have 6 teaspoons a day. Men are allowed to have 9 teaspoons a day. Most of us have about 17 a day. So way, way over that. Is there a healthier alternative? Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, yes, there can be some healthier alternatives. I think we have a list for our viewers. You can think about doing fruit juices or nectars, honey, molasses, maple syrup. The benefit here, and I want to be very, very clear about this, is that in addition to having a lot of sugar, which they do, they also do have some vitamins and minerals, so some nutritional value. They have a lower glycemic index. They have some anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. So what I'm trying to say is that in addition to your sugar that you're getting with those natural sweeteners, you are getting a little bit of some nutritional value. So they shouldn't be sought after like this is a healthy thing to eat. But if you're going to use a sweetener, I would use something like that as opposed to just regular sugar.
Okay, so as for the sweeteners, the artificial sweeteners, are they actually sweeter than natural sugar, or are they at all addictive?
The artificial sweeteners?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or the substitutes?
Oh, excuse me. Yes, the substitutes.
Yeah, no, so the artificial, the substitutes, right. No, I think insofar as the maple syrup and the molasses and everything has regular sugar in it, it's going to feel just as addictive. But absolutely, the artificial sweeteners, I'm sure you know folks who drink, tons of Diet Coke a day. Yeah, you do get addicted to that sweet taste. And people are absolutely exceeding what's considered a healthy amount, if there even is a healthy amount. You said yourself, 77 milligrams a day. It's not a lot.
And doctor, these sweeteners show up often in foods we might not expect. So should there be a better labeling protocol beyond just the ingredients list?
You know, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, when we talk about, let's say that, you know, that I would be allowed to have 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, and I think I put like half a teaspoon of sugar in my coffee, but am I counting the tomato sauce and any other kinds of processed foods, things like that? If you're not looking for it and it's not really, you know, right there on the label, that's probably where most of us are getting all of our added sugar, in places that, you know, are kind of hidden and we don't really see. So unless you really make a concerted effort to, you know, investigate that yourself, I think it's kind of hard to figure out. And so, yes, I do think that labeling would help. You know, I think it'll move the needle a little bit. I think that folks who are just, you know, kind of, you know, eat what they want and don't think about the nutritional value of the things they eat, it may not make a big difference. But I think, you know, slowly but surely, some small change will probably happen.
Dr. Nally Azar, thank you so much. Now, turning now to the local. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to them all. Our bureau teams have done it for you, and this is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call, again, The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, New York Governor Kathy Hochul is declaring a state of emergency over polio. Just one case has been confirmed in an unvaccinated man who was diagnosed with a serious case, or paralytic polio. Experts say one case like this is usually a sign of hundreds more infections. Also from our Northeast Bureau, Princeton University says it will cover the cost of students whose families earn below $100,000 a year. The new financial aid policy will apply to students entering the fall 2023 class. It will cover room and board, plus students will be given a $4,050 each school year for books and personal expenses. Now, from our Southeast Bureau, more than 2,000 people showed up Friday morning to honor the Memphis mom and teacher who was killed last week. Eliza Fletcher was kidnapped while on her 10-mile run at 4 a.m. Runners showed up today, exactly a week from when it happened, at the same time to finish the run in her honor. And now we want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. A new alert from the FBI and Homeland Security comes as schools are back in session. Cyber attacks are now targeting the data of teachers, staff, and even students. The hackers are learning to make money off the information. Los Angeles has already been hit, and there are concerns it could happen to more school systems around the country. In a Hallie Jackson Now exclusive, Tom Winter talked to the top government official in the fight against cybercrime.
The nation's second largest school system under attack.
We were, in fact, witnessing a significant cyber event.
Students and teachers having to reset their passwords. It's part of an increasing trend, not just in Los Angeles, but across the country. It has the U.S.'s top cybersecurity chief, CIS's Jen Easterly, concerned.
As we've seen over the past several years, the education sector, and especially K-12, institutions have in fact been a frequent target of ransomware attacks.
Now, an alert from the Department of Homeland Security and FBI about the threat just as kids head back to class. It says schools, quote, may be seen as particularly lucrative targets due to the amount of sensitive student data accessible through school systems. The alert focused on a group called Vice Society, who officials say are trying to target schools through ransomware attacks aimed at gaining access to birth dates, names, and other sensitive information.
Well, we mentioned in our advisory that we are actually worried about more attacks in the coming school year because ransomware groups perceive that there's an opportunity for these successful attacks. So school districts, many of them have limited cybersecurity capabilities and constrained resources.
The LA School District has yet to publicly name the group responsible for their breach. Superintendent Alberto Carvalho says they're continuing to uncover more and more about what happened.
This entity is foreign. It is not within the U.S. This entity did touch some level of student management system information. We do not believe that that information includes social security numbers or health information, but we're still investigating the level and the depth.
Experts say it's all about the money for hackers. Their business plan, built on ransomware, they infiltrate systems in order to steal data, lock up the machines, or both, then attempt to force victims to pay money to get their own data and computers back.
These organizations have payroll, they have HR. When I was in the Department of Defense, we used to track some of these groups when they went on holiday and vacations. So they operate very much like a business.
Brian Hoagley, CEO of the cybersecurity firm Side Channel, says the challenge for parents is what to do when your kid's digital identity has been stolen.
My kid will inherit this problem and now have to figure this out in 10 years, and they might go for their first car loan or apply for financial aid. And now suddenly, hey, you have all of this credit debt, and they're sitting there going, where did that come from?
Easterly, a mom herself, says she knows how important her mission is.
We want our students to be able to go to school, to learn, to be safe, to secure. We want all of our data to be safe.
And Tom Winter joins us now. And Tom, I remember hearing a couple years ago that small municipalities were being targeted by hackers. Is this the next phase of that?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like every day we would hear about a small police department or a fire department that got hit. Yes, I think they are starting to move on to schools for some of the reasons that we talked about in the story, which is the idea that schools don't have the same type of resources. And DHS is hoping that schools start to pay attention like big companies do to these alerts that they're putting out and telling parents and educators to go to stopransomware.gov.
And Tom, quickly, what's the latest in the investigation into the LA hack?
Right. So that group that we mentioned in there today took credit for it, but still they haven't attributed it directly to that group. The investigation remains ongoing.
Tom Winter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. He was a long shot in the U.S. Open, who's playing tonight to get into the finals. Now, Frances Tiafoe swept past the competition to go further than any American male player has gone in decades. That story next.
These are our missing daughters and sons.
We need anyone who saw something to come forward.
She was wearing a black jacket, a black top.
I'm going to bring my son home alive.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen to the full season now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Harry Styles!
So in the next couple of hours, 24-year-old Frances Tiafoe will get his shot to become the first American man to compete in a U.S. Open final in nearly 2 decades. And to do so, Tiafoe, the 22nd seed in the tournament, will face one of his toughest challenges yet. His opponent tonight is 19-year-old Carlos Alcaraz. The Spanish phenom has shot onto the scene and is seeded 3rd at the Open. The women's side also has plenty of excitement. Tomorrow's final, matches the world #1, 2-time French Open champ Iga Swiatek of Poland. And she goes up against Ons Jabeur, the Tunisian native, who's now the first American woman from Africa and the first Arab woman ever to make a Grand Slam final. Now, ATP and WTA announcer Andrew Kraskny joins me now. And Andrew, let's start on the men's side, where all the attention is on Tiafoe. And what's so incredible here is that we're talking about a guy who has a career losing record. Now, given the dominance of Federer and Nadal over the last 2 decades, put this run into context.
Well, first of all, Gabe, hey, it's not a fluke at all. You take a look at Frances Tiafoe. He made it to the quarterfinals at the Australian Open a couple of years ago. His biggest foe has actually been himself. He has not felt that he belongs at the top echelon of the game. And I think now at this year's U.S. Open, with big wins against Marcos Giron, Andre Rublev, Diego Schwartzman, he has now proven to himself that he does belong there. And we're seeing a very confident Frances. And I think that Frances can actually do well tonight. They've only played once before. He played Carlos Alcaraz in 2021 on clay and won that match. So when you take a look on paper, Frances has an edge, although I think Carlos Alcaraz has shown us at 19 years old that he is the real deal, and he's going to be a tough one to get through tonight. Yeah, and picking up on that, you know, Alcaraz is arguably the face of the changing guard in the sport. Tell me more about him. Well, listen, Carlos is the real deal. And I think we've been talking about this changing in the guard for the last couple of years, but we haven't really tangibly been able to discuss it honestly, because there still has been Rafa, Roger, Novak. They all can still come back, but we're seeing the fact that these young kids are making their mark. We're seeing the next generation really come to life. Carlos Alcaraz is a fighter. The match the other night against Jannik Sinner has to be by far one of the best U.S. Open matches we've ever seen. It was a quarterfinal that's going to go down in the history books. Carlos is the real deal. He's only 19, but he is fallible. There is a possibility that this U.S. Open crowd, this New York crowd who's going to favor Francis, could pull Francis through.
And, you know, there's also this changing of the guard on the women's side, too, led by Swiatek, who could really cement herself as the woman to beat in the sport right now, right?
Well, Iga Swiatek has won 2 French Opens. She's #1 in the world. She had an incredible record at the beginning of the year through the Sunshine Swing, but she allowed those numbers to possibly get to her. And we've seen a little bit of a break in her stamina, and she's had some trouble holding serve the last couple of matches. And the fact that she's taking on a player, Ons Jabeur, the most successful Arab player in the history of the WTA, she's very hungry. Ons made it to the finals at Wimbledon and was very, very shaken that she didn't take home that beautiful trophy. So Ons Jabeur has, they've played 4 times. It's even, 2 apiece. They've each beaten each other once on hard courts. So going into that final, we can't tell you who's going to win that match.
A lot to watch for. Andrew Krasny, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us as well. That's a wrap for this hour. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in for Hallie Jackson. Thanks so much again for watching. Coverage picks up right now. We're coming on the air with a message from King Charles III to a skeptical United Kingdom as he joins the nation in mourning his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. His moving tribute as he lays out a plan for what he believes comes next, not just for the UK, but for his